turn this. You guys can feel free to talk amongst yourselves and do whatever the freak you need to do while we wait for the two remaining people. Kai Clips of Destiny's here now. Let's wait on Kai Clip. We got a pretty decent ratio today, right? Like a female to male ratio?
Yeah.
It's pretty uncommon.
Lots of women.
Yeah, you're normally always begging for dudes. I mean, begging for females. But yeah, we got lucky.
Toph, I really like the polka dot shirt on you. I don't know if she can hear me. Oh, she's not in this channel yet. Never mind. I'll compliment her in 2 seconds.
What is going on? Oh, here we go. We got Destiny here. Tosh here.
I'm in.
Kai Clips, can you join the what is it? The StreamYard?
Toph, you weren't in the Discord, but I was saying you have a very cute top. I like the polka dot top.
I like this top too.
It's really cute on you. Yeah, it looks really good with like your hair color, actually. Yeah, it's a good combo.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, good vibe.
Hopefully my stream puts up with this. Might brick it, who knows? Good to go, guys.
Oh shoot, no, I didn't mean to do that.
Perfect.
Okay. And is Anna not in the Discord? Not too far behind on schedule. Does she not know? Hey Anna, we need you to come into the Discord, please.
What? Can you explain to me again? I always ask every random fuck show host why they do this. Why do you use StreamYard? Why don't you just use Discord video? Why separate over two things?
I think StreamYard was better for capturing purposes, I guess, for some reason. And then I don't know, like that was just like the way that everyone did it, and so then I just did it the exact same way. And then by that point, I ended up like paying for a year of StreamYard because it was just more financially. You save money by doing it annually, and so then I was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna go ahead and use this thing because I already paid money for it.
Okay. That's bullshit, but okay.
I mean, that's all I can give you.
Yeah, terrible reason. Unbelievable.
Where the freak is Anna? What's she doing?
I think StreamYards has names as well. That might be a big part of it.
Oh yeah, that was the other thing too. And then StreamYard, it was easier to manipulate to put like who goes in what area and what row and all that stuff. What's she doing?
Also, hello, friends.
Hello, Stardust.
How are you guys doing?
Doing good.
There we go. Oh, Anna joined. So you know what? Go ahead and decline. Hit that decline. Hit yes. I'm in the middle of a raid in Lost Ark.
Are you serious? The start time is 4 minutes ago. How are you in the middle of a raid?
No, I didn't think it would take that long because I didn't know. I didn't expect this to fail, but it's fine. So don't worry.
Lost Ark, isn't that supposed to be the WoW killer?
I don't know if it's gonna be no WoW killer. It's a good game though. It's actually particularly good in my opinion. I think it's insane. I think the boss fight mechanics are like literally some of the best in like ever created.
Ever created. Wow.
Yeah, I would say so, man.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, thank you guys for being part of another Fanatic panel. I like took the time to speak to every new person about like what's expected in the panel and like what the goal is, and I'm glad that everybody's here and able to oblige. I didn't have the personal conversation with Destiny because I don't think it would do anything. He's going to troll anyway, as he always does.
I'm not even
But we're
trolling
gonna-
right now.
Huh?
There's a serious conversation. Why would I troll during this conversation?
My nigga, you literally troll during every single conversation. Like,
Okay.
you just, I think you literally have a goal of like, how can I piss somebody off and make them get unhinged and then like disrupt the panel, like literally every time.
That
That's
doesn't
your
sound like
game.
something I would do, but okay.
It
All
sounds
right.
exactly
That's
like
cool.
what you're doing.
Character study, all right.
I have
Anyway,
to say, I feel left out. I haven't had the special one-on-one fanatic.
you get it, not so erudite.
Ooh.
You know what?
absolutely right.
ETR.
It's
We haven't
probably
defined the relationship yet.
it's probably
Well-
because you don't troll a whole lot, right?
You
Well,
don't troll, and like the
yeah.
first
Get started.
time, I thought like so I learned the lesson that you have to tell every single person like after like a few mishaps. But prior to that, I didn't know that I needed to do that. So like I wasn't doing it with every single person. And you've already been on the panel and have like displayed that you know how to do it, like how to have an actual conversation.
Fanatic was very, very
Yeah.
firm with me. He said, "You can't troll in this panel."
That's it.
Unlike Destiny, I'm very mature. You know.
Yeah, well, you know what's
Very
crazy
public.
is I didn't like for Stardust. I didn't tell her not to do like blood sports or anything. Hers was like, yeah, please just don't troll, because like I don't think she ever does like screaming and yelling and acting
I do
crazy.
do some screaming and yelling, but
Really?
yeah, you never. Okay, well that's fine. I mean,
It's good. No, I've never encountered that, but I mean, you know, it's good that you're capable. Because you know, there's a place for that for everywhere.
yeah.
But anyway, listen, we're gonna go ahead and start. This is the Fanatic show, the Fanatic panel. We're gonna be discussing rape culture, sexual assault, and I guess kind of the media and its influence there as well. I'm thankful that you guys were all here. Originally, this conversation was inspired by a person named Katie. She wasn't able to make it. I guess she kind of felt mentally drained after our conversation, and she said she didn't want to debate something like this. So, I mean, I can't do anything about that. But I did find a panel, I think, of very able and capable people to discuss this. So we're going to jump right into it. As usual, the purpose of this is to have a conversation. Not everyone will disagree, but it's okay. We can still like explore the nuance around this topic and have an interesting conversation. Thank you guys for all being a part of that and understanding that goal. So the existence of rape culture is contested. Coined in the 1970s, the stated goal was to bring awareness to the fact that rape was significantly more pervasive than public knowledge of its occurrence. Whereas rape culture is defined as a setting in which rape is pervasive and normalized due to societal attitudes about gender and sexuality. Is this real? Is it something that we should be concerned about? So I guess we're going to go ahead and let everyone give their opening statements on that. Freak Kai disappeared. Starting with Taftaj.
Oh boy. Yeah, so Taft, that's easier. I don't think we have a rape culture. I think we have a casual sex culture and a hookup culture and a culture which encourages ways of engaging with sex which are dangerous and frivolous. And I think that like the natural result of stripping a lot of meaning from sex and a lot of the seriousness that comes with it, when you boil sex down to purely just like, you know, seeking this consent, I think you create an incentive for incredibly transactional, temporary relationships. And with those kinds of relationships, you also get bad sex and you get a lot of boundaries which are easily crossed. And so I think that like what you really should be concerned about, if you're concerned about like the modern prevalence of, you know, boundary crossing, is addressing that casual hookup culture and teaching people that they need to engage with it a lot more responsibly or avoid that kind of culture at all. And so, yeah, we'll get into the details of that, but that's my general position.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. Great take. Not so erudite. Would you like to follow up?
Sure. So yeah, I guess my position is that I think like when it comes to like sex and sexual harassment and sexual assaults, there's definitely a problem within our culture. To label that rape culture feels inaccurate and somewhat inflammatory, particularly when you have like internationally cultures that like actually legitimately do more so normalize and have a much higher prevalence rate of like full-on rape. I do think that there is a problem with boundary crossing. I do think that there are issues, right? Like, it would be nice to see sexual assault rates decrease over time. And I'm really for educating that. But I think when we get into like these inflammatory words like rape culture and stuff, we actually like steal away from the nuance necessary to like properly educate women and men and individuals about how to have like safe sex and how to assert boundaries in dating and whatnot.
Okay. Stardust.
So I do think it used to be the case in that circumstances and the behavior of a victim was heavily scrutinized before anyone took a sexual misconduct case at face value. With things like the Me Too movement and other movements, it seems like the attitude around that has changed to automatically believe all people when they come out with an allegation. And I don't think that that's healthy either. I think that with that being the case, we've kind of like flipped innocent until proven guilty on its head in like a public sphere. We've flipped it on its head pretty badly. And I think that actually feeds back into like this kind of this really toxic kind of like feedback loop where it's like scrutinize everything but and don't believe anybody, and then no, you have to believe everybody, and how dare you scrutinize things. So that's kind of how it seems like there's like this very bad kind of cycle going. So yeah.
Okay. And Kai Clips, can you answer the question? Does rape culture exist? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of difficult because a few other panelists have talked about kind of the colloquial rape culture in that it's like non-consenting individuals. I think it's a little more complex than that. I think kind of Stardust was, well, maybe not so much, but I think I'll allude to the fact that certain elements of society can build into rape culture in the sense that it desensitizes people to, forms of violence within relationships. The kind I've interacted with a lot is just the kind of the opposite of rape culture, which is that oftentimes there's like a sexual relationship between a man and a woman, and then a few months down the line, and that relationship being totally consensual, a few months down the line, the woman will change her mind as to what she understood the relationship to be. And then in 99% of cases, the guy is the one who receives all of the blame. And I think there's an inappropriate infantilization of women when it comes to that, thinking that women are always the ones who are innocent and are never the ones who encourage a sexual interaction. And I think that gets us into some hot water pretty quick societally.
Okay. And Destiny.
When I think of rape culture, I think of like two kind of different things that kind of get smushed together into the same thing. The first concept of rape culture, which I think is a little bit older, is this idea that I think Stardust mentioned this, that women kind of aren't really believable, that a lot of rape is made up, and people are kind of uncomfortable even talking about there being like rape. So that was a conversation that we weren't having publicly. And then I think the Me Too movement kind of blew that up. So I think largely we've gotten over that generally, with some exception, that like women have a better time today coming out and being taken seriously, especially online, than they used to in the past. Whether that's gotten too far or not is another conversation. And then there's kind of like this second understanding of rape culture, which I think more broadly applies to kind of the dating habits that we have in society, where women are seen as the gatekeepers of sex and men are seen as like the chasers of sex. And then in that society, men kind of have a bunch of tools at their disposal that they utilize in order to get sex from the women. And when talking about that type of rape culture, I don't really know if that's really been addressed at all yet, because we don't really have conversations around like consent or sex. We just kind of have like really juvenile screaming like don't rape at people. Yeah.
Okay. And last, Anna.
Well, it seems like I'm the only one that is actually engaged with the research on this topic, because the research suggests that absolutely rape culture is still alive and well in the U.S. There's plenty of literature reviews that prove this. So I don't know what else to say on that, except that basically rape culture is about it's about the sociocultural attitudes about victims and rape that are pervasive in a society, and the fact that rapes are still extremely underreported from both men and women, and also the fact that rape myth acceptance, which is an academic acceptance, is still highly prevalent. So this means that people, despite the Me Too movement and everything, maybe that helped a little, but despite that, people still believe things that are false about rape and victims. And that is what rape culture is, and there's really no denying that it exists.
Okay, the floor is open. Yeah, you guys can go ahead and have at it.
I think the problem is that like the question or the debate is really about like what is the appropriate term for this. I think we can agree that there are misconceptions about how rape occurs and the level at which sexual assault occurs. But whether or not we actually label that rape culture is what's contentious. I think we also have, disagreements about or misunderstandings regarding murder rates and what constitutes murder and other forms of physical violence. But I think it's too much to say that we live in like a murder culture. That term is really, I think, where the debate is centered around. And I think the problem with the term is that it fails to really identify where the problems are. And it just sort of like loosely blames men or, paints men as like, the progenitors of this. And what we really need to do is like control men's behavior. And I think that the problem's a lot deeper than that and goes really into, how we engage with sex as a culture in general. And so I think when we reframe the conversation to be about like hookup culture or casual sex, I think we're getting towards like why those rapes and that sexual assault is actually coming. But yeah.
I don't disagree that there is some form of like rape culture, as people call it. I just think that it's significantly changed from what it used to be, right? It used to be that every single piece of information surrounding a case coming out would be heavily scrutinized. Everything, right down to like what somebody was wearing was scrutinized. And while that wasn't healthy in itself, I also don't think it's healthy that we now kind of exist in a space where when somebody comes out with an allegation, we have we've decide to deem somebody 100% guilty on a public stage before they're given a chance to even defend themselves or for the actual case itself to be like moved forward in the legal system, things like that. And also there's also the very real problem of just miscommunication with relationships. The fact that men are kind of taught to be pursuers, right? And they're taught that some men are taught that women are playing hard to get, right? And some women are taught to play hard to get. So this does create a lot of deeper issues that complicate this rape culture even more. And I think it really does feed into itself. It makes things harder for everybody on all sides.
I think something that's really important that kind of gets brought up is initially when the Me Too thing started, it was about holding people accountable that were able to escape accountability. I promise I'm not trying to trigger you with this one, Fanatic, but I think that there were some people that for whatever reason managed to evade the legal system, but when an accusation would come out, you would find out that like sometimes dozens of women would have a similar story dealing with a guy. And it would seem like, okay, it seems like this person was for whatever reason able to escape accountability in the justice system. So when they couldn't find justice in the legal routes, they kind of went like, I don't want to say the social media route, but like the public square route basically. And we went from this idea that like maybe some especially powerful men could escape accountability, but with enough women coming forward, you kind of have some accountability. We went from that to if a single woman accuses a single guy of anything, it's automatically 100% true. And I think the problem is when you set the bar that low, now we've seen, even in just our space, that's not a good threshold for it's not a good threshold for those types of accusations. And what's worse is it kind of reinforces those prior beliefs that, well, hold on, maybe we do need to be really skeptical of some women making these accusations, because then you find out that some come out, you read through everything, and you're like, okay, well, this was kind of bullshit, or this was kind of shoddy, and then it reinforces those views that maybe we should be more skeptical about the claims being made when it's just coming from a single person.
I mean, I think we should also appreciate like how exceptional the situation and the circumstances are that women are even doing this in the first place. If you look at like other cultures, like in China, where women are still receiving like major pushback from trying to, discuss their experiences with party officials, or look back into history and like the relative inability for women to speak up in most cultures. The ability of women today to really hold powerful men accountable is really incredibly unique. And I think it speaks to like, how far the culture has changed when it comes to taking rape and sexual assault seriously. So to cast it as like this rape culture again, I think it like, it sort of obscures that cultural change that has occurred.
So where are your studies? So where are your studies that show that any of this is true? Both of you. Where are the studies on this?
Wait, they show that what's true?
What you
I
just
do have to
said.
say that
That women are able to hold powerful men accountable now more than in other times in history.
Yeah,
I
where's
think
your
I
proof that
think
this has
Twitter
changed?
Twitter has not existed for most of human history. The internet has not existed for most of human history. If you want to like bring something to the public square, and you're a woman who doesn't have like a lot of economic leeway, you can't vote, your ability to bring information to the public square is severely limited.
And those women still get harassed and death threats and all kinds of things, do they not?
Yeah,
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I mean,
within the past and now.
I would say that again. I think Destiny's on to something with holding powerful men accountable. But what we also see is that this has become about not holding powerful men accountable. It's also become about accusing the average man. And one accusation against an average man, or even like a man who is not powerful, who's disadvantaged in certain ways, can be very, very harmful for that person. So yes, it initially was about holding these powerful people accountable, but now we had to acknowledge at some point that we do see that there are some men who are not powerful, who are being accused and being made into a guilty person in a public sphere before even having their voice heard. I think
it's also.
Sorry.
I was gonna say, I think it's also really important that like we have a realistic expectation for what we can suspect or expect out of society. Like anybody making any accusation against anybody ever is going to receive some level of public pushback, especially if it's against a celebrity. But that's probably not even
not justified, so don't try and justify it.
It's not a justification. It's about an expectation of like reality. Like if a sports person like loses to another sports person, soccer, basketball, whatever, like those people are going to get hate. If somebody makes an accusation of murder or assault or rape against somebody, they're going to get a level of like hate. If our goal is to say like we need to have a society where somebody can make some accusation and never get hate for it, that's like unrealistic. That expectation.
Or we need to have
It's
a
not good.
society.
We don't want that society.
I
Or
think
we need to have a society where maybe trauma survivors, there's an understanding of trauma and there's more education of trauma survivors and what victim blaming does to a trauma survivor.
I think you can rope that into like the parts that Destiny and Stardust and myself are trying to bring up though, and you kind of overshadow the reality that might not be as attractive. Like sure, we probably agree on this panel that we should provide more support to people who suffer from trauma, but if you get like 70 people or even just like a dozen people after somebody's been accused of like assaulting somebody or sexually harassing somebody, if 70 people step in afterwards, it is realistic to assume that the fact that accusations have been brought up is now playing a part in the way that people perceive the prior relationship they had with that individual. And it becomes one of these things like, oh, wow, I interacted with so-and-so before and they did something that at the time, like I totally didn't see as a problem. And maybe I even flirted back. But now that I've got the lens of them being an abuser, I'm going to shape my opinion of them that way. So I think for you to say we should just, provide more support for abusers, I think that's like
Trauma
It's not a
survivors.
disagreeable point, and it doesn't address what we've been raising as a problem with the way the response
Because
to
you've
rape
shown no
culture is
proof.
now.
Because
Well, I
you've
think there's
shown no
also-
proof to back up
there's
any of your
a- well,
bullshit.
well,
That's why.
Look.
Wait,
Destiny,
hold on.
Destiny
I don't-
said something
Can we-
really. Destiny
one
said
second.
something really
Wait,
simple.
one second, Clips. 1 second. Yeah, we let's try to be chill. Oh, is my mic not muted? It isn't. Let's try to be chill, Anna. But yeah, like so you're asking them for proof of what exactly?
That any of the bullshit that they said is real.
Okay, but Destiny said, like, yeah, back in the day, it was about holding people accountable. I don't know if you want like a study of like the origins of Me Too, but I think we all
I mean,
saw
what?
like,
How is it different? How is it different now?
how is it different now? Because
are
it's
comfortable
because
coming
it's a
Because you
social
think it is.
phenomenon.
No, because you
it's a
think it
social
is.
phenomenon. I
Again,
mean,
back it
somebody
up.
at your school.
Absolutely.
Back it up
Hold on,
with
Here,
proof.
wait,
There's
so
a
the,
lot of
the
power in
backup
being
would
a
be, has there
victim.
ever been a culture that existed where people feel comfortable going on a big social media platform and sharing their like rape, abuse, or sexual harassment stories? I'm not aware of that ever existed in my lifetime, say for maybe like 5 or 6 years ago when it started to get really popular with twitlongers on Twitter. Has that type of culture ever existed?
There's always been accusations that have existed.
We're not talking about accusations. We're talking about somebody coming out, sharing an
Why are you
accusation on
framing it like it's a problem?
I'm not framing it like it's a problem. I'm just saying that it's something that happens now that didn't used to happen. There's people coming out and
Guys,
socially
please,
sharing
subscribe and like.
accusations
Thank
against
you.
sometimes very public figures on social media platforms. That's a new behavior that has never
And this is
existed
a great thing.
before. I haven't said
well-
it's not. And you agree that it's a great thing, so then we agree that that's our source, is what's
Good.
happening.
I think we've agreed that, or at least I've said
Wait,
that.
hold on.
I've
I
said
don't-
that rape culture is. I've said that rape culture is real. It is a thing, but we have to acknowledge the ways that things have changed now. The Me Too movement was good for holding like powerful people accountable, and we can't deny that. Like it had a worldwide effect. Like the Me Too movement actually took off huge in India, and I'm sure it took off huge in other countries too, where patriarchal society is even more heavily enforced, right? Where rape is even more common. So yeah, there's I'm not saying that there's anything bad about this movement happening. It's the results of it. We have to acknowledge that there is the result in which men who are not powerful and men who are also very disadvantaged are going to inevitably face repercussions of the attitude change we've had towards sexual assault and the way that we view it in the public sphere, right?
Are you done, please?
I was just going to say, I think we also really need to be careful when we're talking about like academic studies around this stuff, because like a lot of the studies around like rape and stuff like that, it's really, really difficult to actually do really strong empirical.
No, it's really not erudite.
Wait.
No, it's really not.
Hold on.
It's hard to do
Anna,
sociological
wait, hold on.
studies on most
Hold on.
things.
Hold
Because
on.
she's
Hold on.
wrong.
Hold on.
So I'm just supposed
Hold
to let her
on.
be wrong.
Anna.
We're both in a
Anna.
master's program, and I
Anna.
know this as well as you do.
Jesus, listen,
Okay.
Anna. Hold on. Wait. Look, the purpose of this is to have a conversation, and even if you're getting frustrated or triggered, you can easily just let someone finish their sentence before you interject. Like that's just how a civil conversation goes with adults. So I'm
Right,
asking
fine.
you to please be an adult in this scenario. Let her finish her statement and then address it.
All right.
Thank you. Go ahead, Erudite.
So a lot of these studies rely on retrospective and epidemiological reports. So there's issues where immediately you can't make causational statements. And a lot of this is retrospective reports are really difficult because the way that you phrase questions really matters, right? And so you have to be really careful in how, like self-reports are rough. So for example, I'm sure like probably Anna, you're more aware of like the 1999 like rape myth acceptance scale. When I look through that, I think it's a decently solid scale, but the psychometric properties haven't been tested super closely, right? And so like the idea that like we just need studies to prove all these things, it's like a lot of times society is changing at a rate, particularly with technology, that research can't keep up with super well. So that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do the studies or that we shouldn't strive to have more empiricism about these topics. I'm super for that. But to just be like, well, I need studies to prove like Destiny's claim, I'm like, it probably doesn't exist, but the lack of evidence doesn't actually prove that the phenomenon isn't necessarily going on. We have to talk about like things that we can observe anecdotally and then what we can support on what we see empirically and kind of do our best to tease between these two things.
The other thing is that like we're talking about these scenarios which are relatively infrequent and have to deal with like relatively few people. So when you look at like the big Me Too cases, you know, we're talking about like populations of maybe like 24 people, right? Like it's really hard to do or come to any meaningful like scientific conclusion based on so little data.
Anna,
That's why,
you can respond.
right. Well, I don't know why you're even bringing that up as it's a non-issue, since, I mean, I wouldn't bring up studies that only use a small population. And also, that's not entirely true, Erudite, and you should know better, because the rape myth acceptance scale is still empirically validated. And if something is empirically validated, we can still certainly use it.
Yeah, you could use it, right? But you get to like assign levels of weight that we assign to things. So for example, right, a new anxiety scale that has just been created might be psychometrically validated within itself, but until it's been tested robustly cross-culturally and a whole bunch of other
Yes.
psychometric properties to make it valid, we only assign a certain level of weight. We also only assign a certain level of weight to self-reports in general compared to other things that can be more observable, like behavioral phenomenon. Now, in the case of sexual assault, where a ton of sexual assault goes unreported, that's exceedingly difficult research to do, right? Which is why we get left with a lot of incredibly inductive studies that I'm not dismissing. And I'm not saying that there aren't problems with sexual assault. There aren't problems with women being harassed. I'm saying that when we're like trying to be like, just give me the science, it's like, it's actually difficult. The science isn't there, and there's a problem with that.
The only way to accurately test trauma and the experience of sexual violence is through asking people. And that's the only way to really test that. So, I mean, unless we can figure out how to mind read people.
But at what point does that like cover for the data? Like, you can't just say, well, it's really difficult to, poll people differently or to actually measure it and to change our methodology or vary it. But just saying that doesn't make your claim or your reliance on the data more significant. Just because all the data that exists needs to or is being done in a way that's not perfect doesn't make that data any more reliable. Just means that there's not many good ways of doing it.
I don't see how it's not reliable. What do you mean?
Well, I'm saying, like, you can't write off, I forget who it was, maybe it was Not So Erudite, but you can't write off the description of, maybe there's some problems in self-reporting data. You can't just write that off as like adding to the validity of the studies.
No, but you also can't just write off the data, can you?
Well, but
I think we all agree that like when it comes to things like rape, and even when it comes to like crime stats, self-reporting is sometimes the only way we can collect data. This is why when you're looking up like crime data, sometimes you're digging through self-victimization reports, right? You're getting reports on crime that's happened in a specific area because, as we know, not all crime gets reported. Same thing with rape stuff. So I don't think anybody is saying that self-reporting is bad. I don't think even Erudite, I don't think you would say that, right? But we have to acknowledge the limits of that data, and we have to be a little bit realistic when we try to say like, this is proven. And it's like the strength of the claim that you can make with such retrospective data is going to be pretty limited, more so than I think the comfort level of somebody saying like, we've proven this with it. Like, you wouldn't make a super solid claim about it. We can only point to it and kind of like infer from there, I think.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at.
The only reason to bring it up is to dismiss the data.
That's kind of like what I was
It's
getting
not to
at.
dismiss the data. It's to say like,
Yes,
what
it
level?
is.
Wait, hold on. Kai, then Anna.
So yeah, that was kind of the point I was getting at. We don't have to say the data's awful. We'll try to get the best data we can, but admitting that the data is not flawless doesn't mean that, or that all the data is not flawless, doesn't mean you can just jump into it as like, well, now we just rely on all of it. We need to go into examining however much data there is, understanding that there are limitations, but it doesn't look like you're understanding.
Yeah, and that's my job, not yours.
Well, yeah, but you're coming at this like, well, because all the data has this, kind of flaw, and because, the self-reporting data is not great.
Not flawed.
That's the only data we have, so let's just rely on it. And Destiny and Not So Erudite are all just saying, maybe we should walk into this understanding the limitations and not relying on it as if there are none.
No, they're saying that we should be believing their anecdotal experiences of Twitter, people on Twitter more so. And I'm saying no.
Is that what you're saying, Destiny and Not So Erudite?
Well,
that's not
actually,
what I heard.
Destiny was saying.
Even framed uncharitably, yeah, I would say that. Like, for instance, I think that there are some social claims that we can make that I'm not going to be able to give you a study for. So, for instance, men tend to be favored for actors well into their later years, and women tend to get pushed out very early. But I can't give you a study showing that. I can just point to every single Hollywood movie that has like a 65-year-old man man paired with a 22-year-old woman. Or I could show you how statements, qualitative data, I guess, from actresses that'll say, yeah, I got this job, I think it was because I was 20 years old. Or, you know, actresses getting cast when they're 17 for some films, cast as adults just because people that, but I can't give you like a study to prove that. We can all kind of just look at the social phenomenon and go, yeah, this is definitely a thing that happens.
That's not true, because I vehemently disagree with your anecdotal evidence of what happens on Twitter. So
wait,
what's the basis for your
hold on, wait.
disagreement?
I want to be clear. Hold on.
the basis is that women are still treated horrifically.
That's not the claim. The claim that I don't think anybody disagrees with that. Here is the claim that I think that everybody, or at least
Victims are not believed.
Okay, chill. The claim is that in the past there were no social platforms for women to come together and make accusations against men that can't be held accountable in other ways. Now that platform exists. By definition, women receive more support for those reports now, because they didn't even exist in the past, than they would have in the past. I'm not saying there's no harassment.
They're getting terrorized more.
That's a separate claim, and it's not relevant to what I'm saying.
Well, that's also like a bad argument. It's like, yeah,
No, it's
now
not.
that
It
you're
happens.
just let me finish and I'll explain it. You're saying they get terrorized more. Yeah, they've taken, you know, this issue of somebody, you know, getting canceled, somebody going Me Too, and you're taking it to potentially hundreds of thousands of people. Of course, you're going to have more backlash. The backlash as a
Okay,
proportion
so you're
of how...
justifying them being terrorized. I don't care about your opinion then.
That's not what I was saying.
That's literally
I
what
don't
you
think
just
anybody's
said.
justifying
No.
it. I think we
This
can
is
agree
crazy.
that I think we can agree that
It's not okay that for anyone to
Hold
get
on,
terrorized.
Anna. You
We
can't
can
just
agree on that.
wait. Hold on. Wait. Can I pause for just a second, Anna? You can't just interrupt every time like you want to say something. Everyone else is taking their time and acting like adults. I'm asking you to do the same thing here. Not everyone's just talking over everyone. You have a point to be made. There's not that many people here. It's a civil
I'm the
conversation.
only one who is, again, like, you
Okay.
dogpiled me basically with all these fucking people who don't believe in the data.
Okay.
I think-
so
I
does
think
the
what
dog-
you're- you're-
wait,
yeah.
What are we appealing
Does
to?
the
Okay,
dog
sorry.
pile, does the dog pile, is this a circumstance that you're uncomfortable with, such that we should
I
do a
mean,
different
why didn't
panel
you
or
tell
something?
me that I was going to be on a panel with people who everyone apparently disagrees with rape culture? You just
I
set
don't
me up.
disagree.
I
don't
apologize
disagree.
if you feel set up. Is this a conversation that you should be removed from? Do you think that this is a conversation that the environment that it's too hostile for you?
No, I'll be fine.
Okay, so listen. I get that you're saying you're going to be fine, but your response is saying that basically because you feel dogpiled that you're going to do this. So if you're not going to be able to be civil, if you're not going to be fine, then we should just remove you from the circumstance, because I don't want you feeling dogpiled. That was not my intention here. But if this is something that you can't do, then obviously we need to do that. Like, I need you to actually read the room and be respectful moving forward, okay?
All right.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Could we
Stardust.
maybe start with like concessions, like things that we can agree with, and then like maybe build up so that like I don't know, there's some movement
Let's
in the
lower the
conversation.
temperature
Yeah,
in here.
Sure.
think-
Let's start us go, and then we'll do that.
I think that Anna, I think you're not looking at this in a very nuanced way. I don't think we disagree that much. I think that so I've said that yes, rape culture is a thing, but the circumstances around how we deal with allegations of assault in a public stage have changed, that our attitude towards it has changed, and that feeds back into the toxicity of what rape culture is. It feeds back into, well, if there are people who are making these claims and our automatic response is to automatically make people guilty, maybe we should be really scrutinizing this more. And so it feeds back into us heavily scrutinizing all of the circumstances around somebody coming forward with an assault case, right? And we've still got plenty of men who are afraid to come forward. We've still, so these are all real things. It's just we have to acknowledge that there are men who are not powerful. There are marginalized men who are very significantly affected by these allegations that come out.
I'm not sure it's just men.
Well,
I mean,
sure,
women get falsely accused also.
sure.
What's the data on women versus men getting falsely accused?
The data on false accusations is that they're extremely rare. David
like-
Lisak's research,
but
Dr.
like
David
men-
Lisak.
How
but,
much
like,
weight
men
do you
or
think we
women.
can stock in that data? Because to get that data, you have to have people either admit or be proven that they've made a false allegation, which is going to be difficult data to get, right? Malingering data is notoriously awful to try to acquire.
I just want to know, like, as a proportion of the data that exists, flawed as it may be, what's like the proportion of men to women who get falsely accused?
I haven't actually looked at that, so I can't say.
Okay, so I have a good question. The statistics from RAIN.org claim that 26.4% of females and 6.8% of males experience rape or sexual assault. Do you guys believe that that statistic is accurate?
I think prevalence rates are so difficult in this area. I definitely think it's high, and I think it's higher than it. I mean, obviously, anything above 0% is higher than it should be, right? But I think there's actually serious cause for concern, particularly with intimate partner violence, especially because we saw an escalation of it during COVID. But prevalence rates of anything that's based mostly on even like child abuse is really difficult because there could be two things where both like people forget memories or they feel like abuse didn't happen when we might document it, and other individuals who might hear like a question like about consent and kind of misunderstand it and be like, oh yeah, I've had drunk sex before, and they'll equate that to non-consent. So retrospective data is really difficult to tease through. So like getting an accurate prevalence rate is a nightmare. And if you look up like literally, and like the one like CDC has certain numbers that like I looked through the methodology, it's not terrible methodology, but then the Justice Bureau has different numbers. And then if you look up just like independent epidemiological studies, you get again different numbers. And
Two questions. So firstly, I linked a paper in chat, a 2020 paper that shows that the increase in reporting of sex-related crimes does seem to have increased after the Me Too stuff, which would show a positive knock-on effect culturally of that happening. And then secondly, just because I'm not a stats loser, not so right, you kept mentioning that like it's hard because these are retrospective. Can you do prospective like rape studies, or what does that mean? When you like, what would be a different way of? I'm curious. Sorry.
Yeah, so that would be prospective. All you could do with those would be allegations of rape that have been brought to trial and then found guilty. Those would be broadly, or you can look at
and we know
cases that have at least just been brought to the police. Those would be the best you could do with prospective studies. So prospective is also not great because you have the dark side of prospective studies because lots of people don't report crime.
Those are highly flawed, and you know that they are highly flawed because of
I'm saying that there's flaws to them.
All of them are flawed. All of these are flawed.
Not the retrospective studies are far.
Or even what we consider
less
sexual
flawed.
assault can be like really flawed. There's a lot of criticisms of that one study. There's a number that gets cited all the time that 1 out of 6 women have been sexually harassed, and I think that came from literally data from 2 universities. For where that number was pulled from, and it gets cited everywhere, like it's ubiquitous across all of society. So I mean, like all of these things.
The rate is higher than that.
Maybe.
But like Anna, you and I both
is.
just agreed that there's retrospective issues for sure, and this is what I'm saying. Research on this is really difficult because there's issues in either direction we do the study. Probably what we should do is some like numbers between the retrospective and prospective, but where do we draw even that point between the two? Because we know with prospective, we're vastly going to be underrepresenting the problem, and with retrospective, we might be vastly overreporting it. So like and to what extent are we doing this on both sides? And we don't have the answer, so we can't put our finger well on prevalence other than saying there's a problem.
So where are these researchers highlighting the issue with retrospective retrospective rape surveys? Because I don't see that many.
I can get you a couple. Like there's a lot there. This is like pretty standardly known within epidemiological studies that retrospective studies of anything because memory's fucking flawed. Like it's just an issue with any retrospective, particularly self-report data. I can get you studies, but it's broadly a pretty well-known control flaw in epidemiology.
But the issue is that if a trauma victim feels that they've been, then that trauma ends up being real. I mean,
but that's not,
we
that
know
doesn't
this.
mean that a rape happened.
But that doesn't mean that a rape happened, and there was a perpetrator involved.
Trauma. We're asking if there was a sexual assault,
and that's the issue that I brought up at the beginning, right? It's like, especially retrospectively, if you hear that somebody is a sexual abuser or something like that, then that is the frame that you're going to be looking at all of your interactions with that person with. And I mean, I don't know if you have data refuting that.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. No, I don't think that's how people are that simplistic. I don't.
They
think
absolutely are simplistic.
Yeah.
No, they really aren't.
In the psychology world that shows how susceptible people are. There are like so many classic psychology experiments that show that with some little amount of public pressure, you can get people to say some stuff that they know is wrong.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that someone is going to be tricked into thinking that they've been raped.
It's not a trick.
It's also about public perception.
I mean, false false memory creation is a well-documented phenomenon, and
Yes,
it was
by
a serious
therapists.
problem.
I would really like to
Yes,
get
I
past.
know.
I would really like to get past like the stats argument, and let's like talk more about like how like the idea of rape culture in general. Maybe if we don't have stats to back it up, do we feel
do.
like okay,
We do have
sure,
stats to back
well,
it up.
that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that do we think that sexual assault and the prevalence of sexual assault can be influenced by different things? For example, the women's lib movement, or pornography, or the media. How do we think that interacts with rape culture? Can we get to that part?
I think inherently media and anything that's socioculture is inherently going to infect social behavior, right? It's going to change our understandings of consent. It's going to understand or change our conception of this like gatekeeping male pursuer dynamic that's like kind of weird and like creates like a lot of like bad positions as well for people. And so I would say all of these things contribute. To what extent, sure, we can argue about that, but like absolutely these things contribute, and it's probably important for us to figure out which things contribute the most to particularly problematic or like consent pushing behaviors from either partner in sexual engagements and romantic relationships.
I think there's also, you need to make a distinction, because a lot of times when we talk about solutions to sexual assault or rape, there's a lot that women can do to like protect themselves and put themselves in positions where they're less vulnerable. And just because we like acknowledge that women have this like ability doesn't necessarily mean that they have like the moral responsibility. And I think that like, there's this like classic scenario that people always like propose, where like this woman's at a party and like she's getting drunk, and she's really putting herself in a very vulnerable, dangerous position. And she ends up being, taken advantage of. She ends up being assaulted. The person who's assaulting her is still the one who's like engaging in this moral wrong. They're doing something evil. But we also can acknowledge that like a woman has the ability to like improve her situation and avoid those sorts of scenarios without necessarily placing the moral blame on her. And when we like get into these discussions, I just think it's like good to keep that in mind, that just, if we acknowledge that like women have some power to, manage their danger, that doesn't necessarily mean that women are responsible morally for the danger that, or for sexual assault that might happen to them.
Some dead air there. No one else has anything? Kai?
Yeah, so I mean, I've read through some of the research about pornography and like what was the metric you guys brought up earlier about
the rape myths acceptance
yes.
scale?
I forget if the research that I was reading mentioned that scale or if it was something else. They had like
Probably
a list of
that one.
questions.
That one's the most pervasive one for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so for me, it from what I've seen, there's not a huge there's not a very easy way to prove, and then there's also not a huge link to pornography increasing the rates of sexual assault, which is something that I originally thought would happen. But from what I have read, it changes people's perception of sex relationships and of violent behavior within relationships in such a way that if so much of this conversation is focused around what people determine to be assault and like the lens they have, I think that certainly has a major effect on what people consider their own trauma or abuse. If they've had this behavior normalized and if they've become desensitized to this kind of behavior, then, and we do know that porn has a desensitizing effect, maybe not in the mind, I'm sure Anna would disagree there, but at least to the material, then that would most likely have an effect on what people consider to be assault. And I think that letting that permeate, letting sex work or pornography, any of these things that are, in my opinion, by definition, dangerous jobs that engage frequently with these depictions of sex involving violence or other things, we're only kind of inviting in problems with rape or the perception of it.
Taftaj, that touches very heavily on what you do for a living. Do you feel like you have a lot to say to that?
I mean, sort of. I'm in like a unique position in that like, my day job was just like posting sexy pictures online, but I don't depict like sex or, that sort of, I don't depict any sex between people really, or a lot of like self-sex. So it overlaps. I know that like people have brought up the prevalence of like choking in pornography, and how when people, engage with pornography that depicts, these violent or, these BDSM sex acts, and you go into sex and you're very new to it and you don't have a lot of experience, people report like, oh, this guy like tried to choke me because that's, what he thought was appropriate. And he thought that's how sex works. So I think, a lot of people do get like instruction for how sex operates from pornography. And the reality is that like a lot of pornography, the way that it depicts sex is a very like mythologized way. That's just, it's not accurate to the way sex actually happens in the real world. And really sets people up for failure when they engage with it, thinking it's going to be one way, and it's not that way.
Okay, Stardust. How about you? Do you feel like the things that they're talking about, as far as like sex work, pornography, and all of those things, do you think that has any impact on rape culture? And if not on rape culture, do you think that has any negative impacts on just, I guess, kind of society at large, or any of that?
I would need more time to, I think, ponder on that question. But I did want to go back to a point that Kai made that I thought was pretty good, was that generally when somebody's accused in a public manner, everybody who's interacted with that person starts to second guess their interactions with that person. So you think about like a pretty normal interaction you've had with that person, you start to think, well, was that creepy? Or was this like, was that a normal interaction? And so even like the best people can fall prey to that type of thinking, right? The most consistent people can fall prey to that type of thinking. And I think that's a pretty important thing to consider, especially when we're talking about, again, like marginalized people who get accused in a public manner. So.
Yeah, I think there's also
I don't think that's relevant at all. Why would it be relevant?
Well, if we're talking about, like, again, how we have flipped the innocent until proven guilty kind of thing on its head in certain scenarios.
I don't think we have at all.
In certain scenarios.
So the flip is that, like, socially, somebody can be basically seen as guilty before, like, anything's ever gone to court or any formal charges are made. We've seen that.
And we had a whole, like, hashtag believe all women, right?
I mean,
and it's based on that premise that, like, you should just believe to start.
And what's like
we can't all like talk, like Destiny made a point, then Stardust, and into April. Anna, you can respond, and then you can go ahead, Kai.
Oh, I mean, that's because the criminal justice system is notoriously awful when it comes to prosecuting rape.
So I said, yeah, but we're saying something happens, then you're saying it doesn't happen, then we say, yeah, it does happen. You go, oh, well, this is why it happens. So
I'm saying it doesn't happen.
Well, if so you're saying that it isn't the case that socially, when somebody is dropped an accusation, people tend to immediately side with the accuser, and then the accused can get
not when it's a woman. No, people don't believe women.
What if the other person?
Because we could just say there's some group in society that automatically.
We don't have to say some group. We don't have to appeal. This has happened. Like time.
No, I am saying there is some group.
There are other parties that get accused.
I've seen it happen, but people don't believe women.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. What I'm talking about, this is why I specifically said the part about the accused person being a marginalized person themselves. If we're talking about a man of color, right, there are scenarios.
I don't think they even have to be a marginalized person. I think just any guy can.
Yeah, it could be an average guy. Yeah, it could be. But like these are very these are like very real things that we've observed in popular culture in just like the public sphere. So I think that it's worth acknowledging, right?
Yeah, I think it's a robust phenomenon. I mean, we've seen multiple cases of trial. There's entire TikToks dedicated to basically trial by media, where they get a certain couple of claims. It's basically believe victim, and then they go after the individual without any measure of trial or like they don't even vet to ensure that the things are true. And so like the idea, like isn't happening, that there isn't kind of this like just believe victims. Like the issue is that like when the Me Too movement started, like just believe victims was a good mantra because there was institutional issues with rape victims coming forward and being dismissed out of hand. There really isn't. Like there are off cases.
The data shows this. The
Which
data shows this. I'll show you plenty of it. I can't believe you're actually denying this. This is so dishonest.
It's
not, I mean, you can just link stuff in the Discord.
Yeah,
And read it,
just send me the data.
I have a ton for you to read then.
Just send me the data rather than like just tell me what it is, because I work with multiple people who work with sexual violence victims. I've spoken with cops in the sex violence department.
And I counseled
so this idea that like,
and I counseled rape victims for 5 years, and let me tell you, it was horrible for all of them.
I'm sure it was. Okay, Anna, I have also been a rape victim. There's nothing here about me trying to say that rape is good and victims don't suffer. I also have been a rape victim. I am not at all dismissing it, and it's frustrating to me to act like I am, okay? What I am saying is that the narrative has absolutely shifted, and there is a serious problem. I have worked with I've worked with tons of rape victims as well. I have also now worked with multiple clients who, as they came out of their addiction, fully owned that they had made a false allegation, and we had to go to the courts together to work through that situation because an innocent individual was incarcerated presently. So the fact that these things don't happen isn't true. Is it the case that more women are probably still sexually assaulted than are false allegations? I fucking hope so. But there are going to inevitably be bad actors, and they're socially incentivized to do so because of the believe victim mantra.
Well, of course they're gonna. If they're addicts, are gonna have had false accusations. There's tons of cluster B personality disorders there.
To make. Oh my god. Sorry.
What? I mean, we all know this is kind of true. I mean, you have the high prevalence
we should stop. Wait, chill. You can't just say that you can't believe an addict's rape statement.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying, of course, that's where you're going to find the false allegations.
Okay, so you're there to know more than me about this, but I'm pretty sure that people that are addicted to drugs are some of the people, or people that are like in sex work. These are the types of people that have the most trouble being taken seriously because of statements like what you just said. Like, oh, they're a fucking druggie. They're probably making it up. Or like, oh,
yeah, I didn't say that though. I'm saying that that's, of course, you're going to probably find more in that population. Yeah, that's because of the personality correlates that go along with that population.
Okay, so let me ask you a
question. You're not saying that you can't trust what they're saying because they're an addict. You are saying that, well, of course there's going to be a high population of people lying about it because they're addicts.
That's a dunk. You're trying to dunk. It's okay. We've already gotten past that. So let me ask, Anna, do you think...
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay, good. Anna, do you think that there's an underreporting of male sex assault victims? Do you think that there's an underreporting of that?
The empirical data supports that there's an underreporting for women and men. More so men, but there's still for women as well.
Sure. So then you would say
culture is still extremely hostile to female victims that come out.
It used to be.
Yeah, less than it used to be, but it's still
that's all anybody prevalent. Saying, I think.
Yeah, that was my whole point.
Nobody was disagreeing.
That's not what you've been saying.
Nobody was disagreeing with the fact that like rape culture is a thing. It is specifically that things are less harsh than they used to be.
You're making it sound like now things have been completely flipped and that, oh my gosh, all these men, these poor men, all these false rape accusations, and that's not true.
Everyone has agreed of the direction of the data. Everyone has agreed with the direction of the data. Like no one's questioning that.
It's okay. So it's all right. So there was a miscommunication. It seems like now
there was no miscommunication.
Sure, it's okay. I'm sorry. There's a misunderstanding. That's what I mean. A misunderstanding, and so therefore it seemed like everybody was coming to. Like, some people were not fully trying my best, Jesus. So it sounds like now at least we're on the same page. Then
there's
hold on,
still
Anna.
a huge issue here.
And it sounds like now that we are on the same page at least. So then it does seem like everyone here does believe that rape culture to some degree does exist, right?
Okay, wait. Here's a few statements I think everyone here agrees on. Okay, one, the rape culture, whatever we want to call it today, is better than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. 2, there are still problems. Okay. 3, women have an easier time coming out today than they did 10, 20, 30 years ago. But 4, there are still problems with them coming out where they get a lot of pushback. 5, there are some very small percentage of rape accusations that are fake. 6, people are still a little bit too cautious around most accusations because they don't recognize that that's a very small percentage of the overall amount of accusations, right? I think everybody here agrees with all of these statements.
Yeah, I think we agree with like the facts. The question is just whether or not we label it rape culture, right? I think that's where the disagreement is.
I don't care what you want to label it as.
Well, but that's kind of important because, like,
Yeah.
something that Tav said earlier is that, like, so I gave, like, my second definition of rape culture, which is one where, like, men are expected to be the pursuers and women are, like, the gatekeepers. I think this leads to, like, a kind of, like, I'll say, like, a rapey culture. But, like, maybe rape isn't the best word for it. And when you give people that impression, you get a lot of people that think that some behaviors are okay because they're not, like, rape, when they are kind of, like, rapey, or when we should have, like, another word. They're predatory, I should say.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
I think the use of like more extreme words can be agitative and beneficial for movement sometimes, but I think in this case specifically, it's actually removing some of the nuance because, like Destiny said, there's a lot of men who are going to do things like that are kind of pushy, but they're like, but it's not rape, and you're like, yeah, it's not rape, but it's also pushing boundaries, which is really inappropriate as well, right? And they're like, well, it's just not rape, and then we keep saying in rape culture, just tell men not to rape, and it's like this isn't helpful to literally any party involved. Like that's why I don't love the label rape culture myself, because I think it actually like reduces the quality of conversations that can be had, which I think is actually leading to more victimization, not less.
And I think you need to consider like the contextualization, or you have to contextualize it properly. Like Destiny was saying about the inception of the Me Too movement and whatnot. We're talking about like, Hollywood producers. We're talking about really high up guys that, had wealth or had class or had prestige that were able to escape the system. And I think because there was not a great transition of that into like more of a public sphere where it's like people at your high school, I think there is a lot of people who, get pushy. And that's not to defend that, but it is to say that they're not like serial rapists. But I think that the movement has had trouble distinguishing the calibers of dealing with, problematic behavior. And if you can't do that, then I don't think you'll be able to address the issue. And that's why I think like that Me Too movement that's spread into society now is the biggest enemy of women speaking up about issues, because then there's going to be that reactionary counter push of like, well, it's like none of the accusations are true and, everybody's lying and they'll just say that anyway.
No, that's just misogyny. That's ridiculous. That's misogyny. Anyway,
okay.
I posted a study that proved my fucking point in the Discord, and you all should probably read it, on how people do still disbelieve and blame women for their own rape, despite the Me Too era.
It's whether or not it's gotten better. We all agree that it's gotten better, right? Or do you not agree with that?
No, I don't. I think I don't agree with that. I don't see how it's gotten better. Women are still
Five-
accused of false
Right.
accusations.
What do we say about like the powerful figures that have been held accountable now that hadn't in the past, right? Whereas in the past, somebody like Roman Polanski or whatever would be getting like applauses from people in Hollywood, but now we see major producers and actors and like A-list actors getting called out. How can we say the culture hasn't changed?
Because one guy went to prison.
Not just
that
one
didn't do
guy.
anything.
There are many
So
actors that have
Anna,
gotten,
like just 5
Women are
minutes
still
ago,
accused of false rape accusations.
No,
They're
we
still
agree
just
with that.
lying.
just 5 minutes
Wait,
ago,
can I-
Anna,
can I
you
clear something up really
yourself
quickly,
said.
please?
Sorry.
I just want to clear up really quickly. First, Roman Polanski didn't get put in prison. It's just that his at this point he's been banned from the Oscars for the last.
I never said.
Exactly my
I never
point.
said. No, wait. I never said he got put in prison. I'm just saying that like a while ago, it felt like there were a lot of people in Hollywood that would still cover for him or support him. Whereas if
Yeah.
you look to today, like the culture around people like Spacey or Weinstein or like other actors that have been called out, now that doesn't seem to be the case as today. That there's as much cover provided for these people as there used to be.
That was what I
think-
was going to describe really
So-
quickly. Is that specifically after they had been accused, like Roman Polanski literally admitted to the 13-year-old relationship with the 13-year-old, and then he continued to work with the Oscars. They were literally Skyping him in when he won in like 2001 and so on and
Yeah,
so
it was
forth.
fucked,
But
yeah.
then recently in 2017, they finally banned him from it. They did the same thing with Harvey Weinstein. They did the same thing, I think, with Woody Allen and so on and so forth. So now there has been a cultural shift, and that they are now like taking stances to make sure that they actually ban people who are like convicted of sexual assault and things like that.
Anna, just
We need
5
to
minutes
acknowledge
ago.
is that there's like a lot of people who don't believe them in, and like the predominant, maybe even the predominant narrative is that like you shouldn't believe them in, and that you should be like very skeptical about rape accusations. Like I can acknowledge that like a lot of rape accusations, aren't treated, with the respect that they should be. But I think that we, on the same turn, we also have to acknowledge that there is a culture of people who also just believe in believing all women automatically. And that's not the appropriate solution. At least I don't think it is the appropriate
I
solution.
think that's just a fringe minority of feminists, though, that think
I
that
don't
way.
think so. No, because and you can look at just like Twitter, right? Or like there's so many instances of this where there will be someone who's like accused of something, whether it be like Aziz Ansari or Dream, the Minecraft YouTuber, who is like accused of like bad interactions with people. And then you dig into the story and it's like a complete nothing burger. But then there are people who like don't take them seriously, and are not able or not willing to talk to them at all from that point going forward. And you know, that's problematic, that we exist in like this culture that is hungry constantly for drama and for accusing people of things, and it eats people up, and then
but I think that's
no good comes
cancel.
of it.
I think that's cancel culture though, isn't it? And I think that like there's a difference between like cancel culture and then the fact that most rapes are still not going prosecuted in the criminal justice system, because I care most about the criminal justice system
Wait.
and getting more
And I think we should like,
what do you think is if I can just like get the framing, what do you think is like the tangible difference between cancel culture and like the Me Too movement or like the anti-rape culture movement?
Isn't the difference that like they were actually complaining about, you know, a real issue with like systemic injustice with they were
I think
complaining about rape
people could
culture.
make the case that they do that when they're trying to cancel certain people.
April?
I mean, I think we need to distinguish between like the vast majority of sexual assault and rape, which isn't something that's called out like publicly, that you don't have massive Twitter threads on. That's the majority of rape and sexual assault. And so if you're interested in like really changing the majority of rape and sexual assault, you know, we can talk about the Me Too movement and cancel culture and these big figures. And I feel like that's kind of a different scenario than like the majority of rape and sexual assault. So maybe, you know, if I can give Anna like a slight bit of credit here, even if it's true that like you have these like cancel culture events where people are like held accountable, or where people are falsely accused, that is still representing like a tiny minority of the amount of times people are either being falsely accused or being legitimately sexually assaulted. So these are kind of two separate issues here.
Well, false accusations of sexual assault and rape are very rare. So, yeah.
I guess I would
Yeah,
ask
also, real
Anna,
quick,
do
hold on.
you-
I just want to real quick. So you cited this study. This study doesn't say anything about how like it's like a study on rape culture or not. This is just a study showing like what effects you can report on or what things you report on that will influence the reporting or adjudication of a rape case. This doesn't this doesn't say anything about whether
That's rape
anything's gotten
culture.
worse. No.
Wait,
This
what
doesn't say
were
about
It's
whether
a current study. It's
hold
from
on.
Anna, what were we supposed to get from the study?
Yeah, I'm just saying that all this study
supposed to
says.
see that what I'm saying is right.
Well, like
That
what
I-
part of
this
what you're
is saying is that if you report on certain things, like the incident location, the sexual history of somebody, or relationship with somebody,
Right.
that you're less likely to get good adjudication. But if you report on other things, like relating to the socioeconomic status of the perpetrator,
Right.
or things like this, that these don't have. This isn't saying whether or not rape culture has gotten better or worse, or even to what extent it exists.
It's showing that rape culture is still fully
No,
active.
this is just showing. This is just
Yes, it
showing how
is.
people adjudicate cases. That's what this study is about. Just as a heads up. Okay.
Yeah, that's rape culture.
Would you say that we have a crime culture if there are people that are less likely to acquit or not acquit based on like the characteristics?
No, because this is based on misogyny. It's just
No, this isn't based on misogyny.
Yes,
no,
it
hold on,
is.
wait, hold on. Your own study contradicts that because in this very study it says that male cases were less likely to be believed than female cases. So that implies misandry more than anything else.
I mean, we do know that that is a problem, though.
It might be, but you don't have data to show that. Your study showed me that there's a less incidence of believing male rape victims, and this is just showing the difference between how people adjudicate cases based on what's reported.
Right. It's just like why we have rape shield laws where criminal justice attorneys are not allowed to invoke the fact that, you know, a victim has been like sexually promiscuous or something, because, you know, the rape case is never going to get prosecuted then. You're screwed. Like there's no way a rape victim is going to get justice.
That shows that that's a good thing. That shows that we're taking into account studies like this by not reporting on those things because that will affect the adjudication of those cases.
Anna, do you
Right.
know when that policy was enacted? Like when did the policy come into place that you couldn't talk about like a woman's promiscuity in the case of like a sexual assault? Do you know when that policy was made?
I think that was in the 90s.
Okay, so
I
you
mean,
could
it
argue
doesn't
that at
matter
least in the
because-
last 30
Criminal-
years, like it's gotten better because of that policy alone. And I would agree, there's a
Doesn't
huge
matter.
problem. Like you and I would probably fully agree, there are absolutely problems in the processing and persecution of rape. Not all of
really
them.
bad about it, yeah.
Yeah, there's some huge problems. And the problem is that not all of them are actually like things that humans can control. For example, like things like
Yeah.
rape kits and stuff like that. Lots of
Yeah,
them
there's
don't get processed. So we could fix that. But there's a lot of cases where in rape, a woman might not come forward until 4 to 5 days later. So there's no evidence to be collected. And then you have just a really weak case to try. And it's really hard to push anything because it comes down to a lot of time he said, she said, which are really, really difficult cases. And this isn't to be like blaming the victim. It means that like there are instances where like the judicial system is failing victims and failing overall the system that are wholly benign and just inherent to the nature of the forensic evidence that we can utilize right now. Like if somebody doesn't leave evidence, it's really, really hard to prove rape cases without like video evidence or like multiple witnesses. Like it's really, really hard to try these things and have them actually go to a guilty verdict, which is super sad. But that doesn't mean that there's like this sinister system at play. It means that like
no, I'm not saying there is, but there's still underlying misogyny because people are still assuming that false rape allegations are that prominent. And there's still things that we can do to fix the criminal justice system, and plenty of scholars have plenty of suggestions on this. I've read so many studies on this and what they're doing.
What's one thing that could improve that?
Making rape myth acceptance less
No, hold on. In a court of law, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime was committed. What's one thing that could alleviate that? If somebody doesn't turn in a rape kit,
you could have someone like what I want to be an expert witness appeal and explain to the jury on trauma reactions and typical of rape victims.
That's not beyond a reasonable doubt that a crime has occurred.
It doesn't matter. That still helps the jury to understand.
It doesn't help at all. All you'd have to do is bring in one expert witness that shows that trauma reactions can develop from things that aren't even traumatic, or that traumatic people are less likely to recall events accurately.
Or you could develop traumas based on no experience at all, but you can just be led to have
that's like some of the least reliable evidence.
Well, that's not true because that only happens with therapists and not with like random people.
It couldn't happen with a team of lawyers or with parents that are talking. Of course it could, right? This could develop. It doesn't only happen with therapists. Tons of people can instill bad memories or false thoughts or whatever in you.
Most of the studies were done by just random research psychologists, not even counseling. Most of the studies of false memories has actually been done by like forensic units, more like forensic psychologists and then just research psychologists. And as you would know, a research psychologist isn't a therapist, and they're not usually trained in therapy at all. They're usually trained in statistics and all the boring shit, right?
You're using it out of context, though. It bears no context to this, and it's being used in bad.
Well, you're trying to say that only therapists can create false memories of a trauma, but we're saying, well, that's not necessarily true at all. Like, if anyone just has the process figured out, anyone could create a false memory if they just replicate what the therapists sometimes do, right? So the idea of like, we could get an expert witness to defend the victim, you can get an expert witness to dismiss the victim. That's why an expert witness won't actually solve the problem of persecuting sexual assault better.
So let me ask you guys a question.
Why do they use expert witnesses then? Why do they use
witnesses are used to build on top of other types of circumstantial evidence?
You can't just claim that anyone can create a false memory. That's not true.
That is true.
Okay. Well,
no, it's not true. Where is the data that supports this? You can't just make claims out of your ass.
So then here's another question.
If you don't have a
guys,
degree,
and I think this is actually related to the conversation
memories.
at hand. Do you guys believe that it's possible? Do you guys believe, given the things that you guys are talking about, describing the fact that sexual assault, it's like less likely to have forensic evidence and things like that? Do you think that there should be some sort of different burden of proof regarding sexual assault cases than?
Yes.
Of course not.
Why not?
Our justice system is constructed around the concept of innocent until proven guilty. You can't suspend that just for some types of cases. That's ridiculous. It would completely break.
I think that's the part we've been moving to. That's like kind of the tough part of this conversation is that, there's a lot that we do, and there's also a lot that we simply can't do something about. If somebody does not get like a rape kit, and if there's not a lot of evidence, the uncomfortable truth of the matter is that it's really tough to do something about this. And I think because it's tough to do something about it without a rape kit or something else, I'd see the response, or rather the response I have seen is that people will then go to, trying to take this to like a school, or they'll make it like a social push. And there, the validity of certain accusations is even less convincing to people. And I think in that circumstance, that's when you get most of the like, oh, it's a false accusation, like I'm not going to take it seriously, that kind of culture.
And it should be hard, as much as it sucks. Like, it should be hard to get a rape or like a murder or an assault conviction on somebody. Like, these are really big charges from the state, and you want them to have like a high burden of proof to convict somebody of it. That's how our legal system is designed.
Yeah,
Starter?
these are very heavy accusations that taint somebody's life for a very long time, if not for the entirety of their life afterwards. And as much as I empathize with the victims of assault and rape and all of these things, the best thing that I think we can do is educate people to know what to do after they've encountered or had an experience like this, right? Like getting a rape kit done, not taking a shower after something's happened to you, right? Rather than changing the amount of evidence that we require for somebody to be considered guilty.
Anna, you disagreed with that. You think we should change the burden of proof?
Well, I think we could change the criminal justice system, and plenty of researchers have been talking about doing this. Plenty of
Wait,
law.
change it how?
I mean, like with the rape shield laws, things like that don't allow criminal justice attorneys to do that. No, there's still plenty of problems because criminal justice attorneys, and I saw this when I worked with rape victims, they can still like, you know, insinuate that a victim was maybe a slut or something, or like, you know, they worked as a sex
My
worker.
understanding is, looking at how court cases have gone in the United States, I don't know the legal terms for this. If a lawyer wants to chime in or whatever in my chat or something, my understanding is that you can't bring prior character evidence to a court to get a conviction on somebody of something like that. Like, this is what they try to do. For instance, you can't let it. You'll get called out for a mistrial. Like, if you do that as a prosecutor, you could get fucked and lose the whole case. My understanding is if you try to bring forth, it literally has happened in court cases before. I don't know why you're saying it doesn't. Like,
okay, because it doesn't.
Oh, well,
do you have any evidence for this claim?
Because
now we can ask
this happened during the written.
Well, if you're asking for evidence from everybody else, I think it's fair that people can ask you for evidence.
Well, then where's the evidence from everyone else, Star?
Okay, so this isn't an evidentiary based claim. It was more of an intuitive claim. No,
this isn't intuitive.
I was correcting it.
Okay,
not intuitive. It's actually something that like we've actually seen. But it's okay. If Anna's not willing to accept that, then just move on past the evidence part.
Well, but it's important because typically you're not allowed to do like character assassination things in a courtroom if it's not directly relevant to the case.
But they can still insinuate a victim was like a slut or something, and like a jury will still get that.
Then
like they will still hear that.
Then the job is on the defense to call that out.
Which they would, because that would potentially give them a mistrial, which would be great for them. So like courts are really, really, really well controlled.
With the Brock Turner
if you're going into this field though, Anna, you know that court systems are really well controlled and they're very tight about what is permissible or not, because you have a defense and a prosecutor. And so if you do something that violates like trial rules, they'll just call a mistrial because that's what the defense job is. So like I don't know.
But I'm saying, I mean, this happened in literally the Brock Turner case, Erudite. So what the fuck about that? Stop acting like I'm dumb or something. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Anna, you're getting a little antsy again. Do you need some time? I don't care why.
I mean, people are trying to discredit me, and here I am, like I'm
disagreeing with you.
No, they're trying to discredit me.
Not discrediting. It's just disagreeing.
It doesn't matter. Whatever they're doing. We're going to
hold on.
Okay, well, what about the Brock Turner case then?
When we say the Brock Turner case, right? Are you talking about the character of an accuser or the character of a defendant?
The victim, not the accuser. The victim bill of rights means that you call them victims in the court system.
I think that depends sometimes, but
no, it doesn't depend.
It absolutely depends.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, so for some, at least in looking over the Rittenhouse stuff, there are some judges that won't let you call certain people victims because that charges the jury to hear people as like,
it violates the victim's bill of rights. That judge was violating the victim's bill of rights.
Okay. Brock Turner was convicted, wasn't he? Wasn't he found guilty?
Yeah, for like 6 months.
Okay. So we can definitely talk about like length of persecution, but even in the case of Brock Turner, he was found guilty. So I don't know.
But his attorney was able to still insinuate that the victim was like, had like a drinking issue and stuff. And he still was able to, assassinate her character. That's what I'm saying. That still happens. These are still issues that need to be addressed in the criminal justice system.
What is the legal drinking? Is it 0.08?
I think it depends.
I think it depends on your state. I think in,
Also-
like in my province it's 0.05.
Okay, hold on. I just want to
Utah's
be
as well.
wait, no, wait,
Wait,
hold on.
wait.
I want to be really clear here, okay? Just because it's important, right? So, for stuff that's evidentiary in a court of law, you can't bring up prior misconduct to try to assassinate somebody's current character unless it's incredibly relevant to what's being talked about. Like, they made a statement about, like, I'm going to kill, I'm going to rape, I'm going to do something. So I haven't looked at any of the specifics for the Brock Turner case, okay? But now when I'm reading this, Emily Doe, I'm assuming is one of the accusers, when she was tested at the hospital, her blood alcohol content was 0.12%. And it sounds like the doctors estimated at the time of the assault it would have been 0.242 or 0.249%. So if this is the case, then it makes sense why alcohol was brought up, because it seemed to be directly relevant to a factor relating to the rape.
It was a character assassination.
No, that's not.
No,
a
it was in her
character
defense.
That is absolutely not a character assassination.
No,
if I'm going to
because
be accused of
that's not
something
what I'm
and the person
saying.
was highly drunk at the time it
Yeah,
happened, that's going to
okay,
be relevant to the
Tom,
court
it-
case. Of
it-
course.
That probably helped in the guilty verdict. If you're that inebriated, how do you consent? You're probably
Yeah,
blacked
exactly.
out.
But I'm saying that
Not
the
a character
attorneys
assassination. That's a
did.
defense.
No, I'm not saying that's what the defense was. For fuck's sake.
Okay, Anna.
I'm saying that the defense attorney
Anna.
still did character assassinate her.
Okay,
Okay,
Anna.
Erudite, you're like really disappointing me, honestly.
Okay,
Like I
Anna,
don't even
you're disappointing me a lot more. Look. This is
Like,
literally
you're just-
this is literally the final warning I can give you. I need you to be civil. If this is too charged for you, because I get it, being dogpiled can hurt and it can be whatever. If this is too charged for you, then maybe we need to remove you from the situation. This is the last warning I'm going to give you. Okay?
All right.
Please continue on with the conversation.
I don't quite remember where we were at.
I was trying to say that that's not the character assassination I was talking about, and you kept trying to strawman me, and I don't appreciate that.
Which character
Don't do it
assassination
anymore.
were you talking about?
Where the defense attorney insinuated that she had a drinking problem, not that she was very drunk. It's the fact that he insinuated she had a drinking problem.
Well,
So don't strawman me anymore.
That probably wasn't admissed. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if there was like a follow-up, but that was probably not deemed super relevant, especially if the thing at the end of or rather if the argument being made by the defense is like, yeah, she her intoxication level is way above being able to give consent, and that aids in like the correct verdict. I mean, I don't know. I think that comes down to the lawyer.
A character assassination.
Well, but character assassinations can happen in any courtroom ever. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised that it occurs as well
no,
in
there's no
rape
justification.
cases.
No, there's
Hey,
no
can we-
justification for it.
Anna,
It's
can you
not
tell us
okay.
what is the character assassination that you're referring to?
The defense attorney insinuated that the victim maybe had a drinking problem, and that's why she shouldn't be credible. And this happens all the time in rape cases, which is part of rape culture.
No, I think it happens in like
There's
a lot
plenty
of
of empirical
cases.
data on this.
When I think
But
of rape,
it's worse in a rape case.
when I think
Is
of
it not relevant?
Wait,
Like,
hold on. Start us first, because she was going in April.
well, I think April should go first because I'm probably going to bring up something.
Okay, then April, go ahead.
Adjacent.
I mean, you do need to establish credibility if someone's making an accusation. If there's reason to believe that someone's like not a credible accuser, if they have ulterior motives or are like unable to actually make the accusation, if someone like physically was not able to witness something occurring or perceive the sexual assault, and then they're like told later by their friends, and I'm not saying this is what happens in this circumstance because it was like an actual conviction in this case. But we can imagine that someone is just like told, yeah, you were assaulted, or they're convinced that they're assaulted after the fact. That's a really big problem. And you do need to establish in court that someone's actually able to make the accusation, on good conscience, credibly. So, to an extent, like character assassination is bad, but like you do need to establish that someone's a credible accuser in the first place.
Also, I don't think the Victim's Bill of Rights says you have to be referred to as a victim in court. I don't know where that comes from.
So,
I'm reading. But,
when I think of rape culture, I don't think of my what I would say is the most like, or one of the more harmful parts of rape culture would be like immediately after an assault or something like that, it's not about like when they go to court, right? It's when somebody goes to authorities or something like that, right? When somebody goes to somebody they trust and tells them what happened, and everything around that is scrutinized. That's when I think is like the most like harmful part of rape culture. That's what I would say. I don't know where I was going with this. I'm sorry. I'll be quiet now.
Well, I mean, at least you tried. So listen, I guess I feel like we're kind of nearing the end of the conversation. I don't really feel like I don't know. I don't really think there's very much more to like milk out of the conversation. Is there anything else that anybody feels like is kind of poignant that they feel like needs to be stated?
Something that was said earlier that I think is really important is one of the reasons why it's so important to turn the temperature down on the way that we talk about this shit instead of every action being rape is that it's really hard for some people to come to terms with past negative actions they've done if they feel like they have to frame it through the most hyperbolic fucking words ever. Like with the current definitions and the current way that we approach rape, almost every single like encounter between two teenagers is probably involving some level of rape because teenagers are dumb, because it happens, because people aren't thinking. But to call it all rape makes it impossible for somebody to ever view a prior action through some sort of like introspective lens because they're worried that by entertaining the thought, they have to like brand themselves a rapist, which is another reason why I think it's good to like turn the language down on some of these things we talk about.
This is exactly correct. And that's what I brought up initially. Like, I think we need to acknowledge that we have like a problem with casual sex and the casual sex culture. And, recenter the language. So we're really identifying like what's the problem here, and why people are getting in these circumstances in the first place.
Well, it's not just that, like throughout the last 50 years, I think most of the people who have had sex by today's standards would either be considered, not going into it, exercising, proper descriptions of consent, or they are just like straight up rapists because they didn't ask for consent. And I think that's kind of like the terminally online thing that's infected this discourse is like, the way people describe consent now is not the way that people ever described it. And that doesn't mean that every person who had sex was a rapist. It means that, right now, because of like the heat of this conversation, we have to think differently about consent. And I would argue that that's not normal. I wouldn't make a claim as to whether it's better or not, because I don't know if there's like a significant uptick or downtick in the amount of rape cases, but it's just simply not how relationships have been had. Like if you told your grandpa that, before you kissed your girlfriend on like your second date, you asked her if you could kiss her, he'd be like, what are you, like stupid? And he'd like smack you or something. So I think that this discourse has certainly changed the way we look about consent, but I haven't seen whether that's like a clear all the way good thing or not. I think it's just now making people way more conscious about every action. Like Destiny said, now it's hyperbolic too. Like nobody wants to admit to being a rapist, and nobody wants to admit to themselves that they were raped. Sometimes people do want to admit that, and then they come off, too quick in admitting that because they've got a different, frame of reference after their interactions with somebody are like put through the lens of them being like an abuser or something. But those are my 2 cents.
Yeah,
I mean, oh, talk on.
I was just gonna say, like, I don't know if I'd be willing to say like it's a casual sex culture problem. I would say like we've kind of jumped from like one puritanical view of sex to almost it seems like another, but there's still like not actually a lot of nuance about conversation. Like I think whether you want to have like traditional sexual roles or casual sexual roles, I think is actually pretty neutral. The problem is that like our social landscape hasn't actually evolved to deal with this, right? We don't really have like actual meaningful conversations about consent, or about like implied consent and misunderstood consent, or consent when you are inebriated, like all sorts of things that lead to like really dicey situations. And so like, is it a casual sex problem? I would say it's more of like a lack of social conversation, which is why like these like really hyperbolic of like, yeah, but rape is bad and like we need to just believe victims is like super, super damaging to the conversation because we just can't get anywhere. And it doesn't actually solve the problem. It just leads to like circling around kind of the same talking points without any actual like measurable solutions of like, okay, well, like what is good sex education? Like what does consent actually look like? Like what are the cues that you're explicitly looking for? How do you convey your consent well? Like all sorts of things. There's just like there's no space for the conversation because we just want to say like rape is bad and like we should like care about victims, and it's like both of those things are obviously true, but can we go beyond that?
Okay, then I have another question. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Anna. Go ahead.
I wanted to say that empirical data also shows that most victims of rape don't recognize also that they've been raped, because even though what happened to them meets the legal definition of rape. So that's another problem that we have with rape culture, is that so many people don't think what happened to them is rape. They're too scared to label it as rape. So that's a really big issue too. Also, another issue is that rape kits don't really do much, because most rapes that occur are date rapes. So rape kits don't always necessarily do all that much, since again, it's like a lot of times it's like your date. It's an acquaintance, a friend, or whatever, and the argument will just be, well, it was consensual. So.
Well, the rape kit is still essential, though, right?
Yeah.
So we shouldn't say rape kits don't do much. A rape kit is literally a necessary precondition to a rape accusation. So
yeah,
I think rape kits it's not sufficient, but it's necessary. But I mean, like, that should probably be the case, right? If it's a he said, she said, should that really be enough to make a conviction off of?
Yeah.
Well, there's probably legitimate issues that both victims don't realize that they're being raped. I imagine there are perpetrators who don't realize that they have sexually or raped somebody either.
That's very common.
That's a huge thing also.
There's a lot of stuff, which is why when somebody maybe gets accused of rape and they literally don't think they happened, we get into really messy territory where somebody literally thought that they had consent and the other person literally thinks that they didn't give it.
Yes.
And now you're in this weird situation to be like, whoa, now what the fuck? How do we handle this? And I actually don't think the social landscape is dealing with that well.
Yeah, there's also research that shows that when men are drunk, they're more likely to interpret women's neutral to flirty actions as consent to sex, which is kind of scary and could also explain a lot of things too.
I think we can acknowledge also that in a lot of rapes, a lot of people who are on the receiving end don't say anything, don't give verbal communication. That's not their fault, but
not.
But also the person who is on the giving end is also not verbally communicating. So I could very well see plenty of space there for there to be misinterpretation.
Yeah, it's called tonic immobility. It's called tonic immobility. It's like 70% of rape victims experience tonic immobility, which means they freeze up. So they don't fight back. They don't say no. It's called tonic immobility, and it significantly predicts post-traumatic stress disorder and severe depression.
It is really hard to prevent a rape when you're in the moment. I think that unfortunately, a lot of the language also I think strips women of agency. There's a lot that women can do, and I had a panel discussion a while back with all women, and one of the things that one of the women on the panel said was that she has a lot of sex and a lot of relationships with people, and she believes that it's just it's part and parcel, that she's accepting that if she has a lot of sex with people, she's going to be sexually assaulted. Which I think that's pretty scary. And a lot of people on the panel ended up agreeing with that and saying that I also engage in frequent casual sex, and I've just accepted that when I do that, I'm going to be in positions where I'm compromised and sexually assaulted. That's scary, frankly. But I think that when we talk about rape culture, we also need to accept that there's a lot women can do to make sure they're putting themselves in positions where they're not going to be at risk for being sexually assaulted.
This is one thing where I deviate from probably every single one of you on, well, one of the many places, but within this conversation, I think one of the biggest things we can do to improve the arguments or the idea of whether rape culture exists or not is kind of gatekeep when sexual intimacy occurs and make that something that's socially normal. Obviously I'm a Christian. I'm not having sex till I'm married. And not only do I think that's, a great thing, because then it makes, a romantic occasion more special. It makes it something unique to the partner and something that's kind of bound by marriage, but it also makes it so that, I'm getting a character established. Like, I've had accusations thrown up against me before, but because people know that, like, I'm a very celibate individual, like I don't go off, kissing strangers in parking lots, because they understand my character, they're less prone to believe the accusations against me. And that's something that I think men need to do better at. A lot of men are surprised that people believe accusations against them, but they live lives that are only conducive to those accusations being true. So that's basically what I would say. I think if people didn't have sex till they were married, this problem would largely go away. Of course, rapists will still exist, but I think there's so much less of a middle ground, right?
Yeah, no, I agree absolutely. I think that like a lot of the ways that you approach sex can put you in more danger for being sexually assaulted. And frankly, like a lot of people are not responsible enough to like engage in sex in a casual way that's not putting them, at risk. There's people who are able to do that and are able to engage in casual sex safely. But I think for a lot of people, it's really dangerous because they're not able to speak up for themselves or set boundaries. And so, like, the reason why we have certain cultural rules about engaging in sex and the reason we put up these boundaries is because I think we know or have known for generations that, like, it is incredibly dangerous unless it's highly controlled. And there is a lot of like marital rape as well. So I think that like on the other end of that, there's a lot of danger in like traditional, modes of approaching sex as well. But it's a different kind of danger, and it's a danger that, a lot of times we know more about and can address in different ways.
I'd actually wonder if we know less about intimate partner violence. Like we know a lot about like demographics and statistics, but it feels like we actually know very little about what to do about it, right? Like when it comes to casual sexual encounters and being like assaulted by an acquaintance that maybe you just met like a couple of hours ago, those are actually the lower stats. And it seems like it's actually, Anna, this is probably something you and I can agree on. There are certain things that we can like advise women to keep themselves safe, and certain things that we'd recommend if we also know that they maybe have a trauma history, but they're also interested in engaging in sex, right? And so like we actually have education about that, but most of the sexual assault is coming dominantly from intimate partner relationships, right? And I don't really know what we do about this, right? Like, sure, we can educate people about tonic immobility and like the freeze response during sex and stuff like that, but that seems to probably be more beneficial when you're having more casual relationships with people that you don't know, right? I imagine in most cases, I'd hope at least, that if tonic immobility is happening in an intimate partner situation, that these two are speaking about it. And so like we can maybe do education of like, if that's happening, how do you talk to your partner about it? But I don't know. I actually feel like as a culture, we really don't know how to deal with intimate partner violence. And like, I would say when Evan was saying like there's people who don't know that they've been raped, I'd say most of the cases when I've come across that, it's been people who have been in a sexual assault situation with an intimate partner. And they have a hard time labeling it as like sexual violence because they also have like a strong emotional connection and a warm regard for this person, right? And so it leaves them with a lot of cognitive dissonance and they're kind of like, how do I make these two things make sense?
I don't think the issue is unique to intimate partner violence. I think we just have a really bad understanding of like relationships and boundaries in general. Like anecdotally, when I read like posts where people talk about like, like I don't know what to do about my boyfriend, like he doesn't wipe his ass, and I don't really like sleeping with him when I read post after post, or someone will be like, I'm not really sure what to say about my husband. He said that my whole family was full of retarded people and says I'm not allowed to have friends anymore. What do I do? Like I see so many people that there are clear issues going on in this relationship, independent of any sexual assault or whatever, where people just have a bad understanding of like either they've had bad modeling in their life for what a healthy relationship is, or they don't have the tools or the confidence to stand up to their partner, or they just don't know what they themselves deserve. Maybe it's a self-esteem thing. I'm not sure. But I think that in general, we have really big problems navigating relationships or establishing healthy relationships for ourselves collectively. Well, not ourselves, for most people, because I'm good at it. So fuck everybody.
I'm gonna make my audience angry for a minute by counter signaling the incel question again. I think this is something that people often downplay the importance of. Like, there is a language to being in relationships, and there's a language that women speak that you need to understand. And a level of interaction with relationships and women is necessary to be fluent in this and to ultimately have a marriage, in my opinion. And people are going to think that's controversial, but I think it goes without saying. You guys probably don't think it's controversial, but my audience is tearing me apart for it right now.
So let me ask you guys a quick question. I know rape culture and all that like has to do with like punishing of sexual assault, but what about now that we've had like the Me Too movement and the fact that like accusations are like a lot more forthcoming, like people are more just willing to do that. What are your thoughts on increasing punishments for false rape accusations?
I think that the punishment for a false accusation should be whatever the punishment is. You have to be wary that if you're like the threshold for what a false accusation is needs to be pretty high. It can't just be like an accusation that didn't win in court, because then you have like a very weird chilling effect on all sorts of accusations. Actually, I don't know if there should be a penalty, like a false accusation penalty. It should just be like whatever lying under oath is, right? Like perjuring yourself, which I think is already illegal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar like cases of malingering, for example, where like somebody fakes brain injury and stuff. Like the level at which we're willing to label something malingering is really, really, really high, and we want it to be beyond a shadow of a doubt. Because especially with the sexual assault, we have this weird thing where somebody might feel sexually assaulted, and the person who they feel perpetrated against them literally was confident that they got consent, right? And so in that case, the court might fall apart and not convict the individual, but the victim shouldn't be now tried as making a false allegation because they might have literally felt assaulted in that situation. And so like I think like there are, like I've said, I've worked with individuals who have fully come out. Usually in those cases, to be honest, how it's played out is the court thanks them, and they go through the steps of basically like amending the statement and releasing the individual, which is like potentially less than maybe should happen. And I would like to believe in this case the court had grace because they were in active addiction when like the claim was made and stuff like that. But I don't know. I think persecuting it is like we'd have to be really, really, really careful.
Yeah.
Well, sure. Like, wouldn't the idea of like persecuting it would need to be a known intentional false accusation? It wouldn't just be
there would need to be a really high threshold. But even so, like it should just be the same as any other false accusation you make. Because to make a false accusation, I think you necessarily perjure yourself, right? That's what a false accusation is. You submit a statement to the court that's a lie, that's knowingly a lie. So I don't know why there would need to be a special perjury for rape versus anything else.
Well,
What
there's
if
also
someone
like
feels
libel
like
and
they were-
slander laws.
What if they feel like they were assaulted? Like that's the big issue, isn't it? Like they might genuinely feel like, then that's not a lie.
And a malingerer might say that they genuinely feel. So like in these cases of perjury, you'd have to have beyond burden of proof of saying, even if you say that you felt this way, you're only saying this to defend your false allegation, right? Like you would need beyond a shadow of a proof to ensure that they knew what they were doing.
You have to know that it's false.
Because there's a
Like a
difference.
confession, something like that, yeah.
Right, yeah. Because there's a difference between someone who genuinely believes it and someone who is lying
And
intentionally.
when it comes to like public figures, there's like an added layer as well. Well, when it comes to like slander laws, we have to actually prove like malicious intent, that you're like actually trying to hurt someone, as well as like knowing that it's false and spreading it to a public platform. So yeah, I mean, I do agree that like the standard should be pretty high for like proving that it's a false accusation.
Do you think our slander laws are high? Do you think like the in order to like prove like slander or libel in court, like the barrier is already really high, right?
Yeah.
Like the
And it's higher for like public figures.
Only for public figures is it really high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, are there like a lot of cases of like slander happening against like non-public figures?
Isn't slander
Yeah, of
and defamation?
course.
Isn't that civil shit? So you can just sue whoever the fuck you
Civil.
want. for that.
Yeah, it's civil. It's not a crime. It's
Right.
civil. Civil court.
It's a civil crime. But anyway, how do you so you're saying that like
You just sue someone.
no, I'm saying are you saying that it's commonly happening and there's commonly lawsuits over slander and things like that? It's commonly enforced
Probably
against
thousands of
non-public
them,
figures?
every year. You probably just
Yeah.
look them
Okay.
up, yeah.
I guess
I
I'd
mean-
probably have to look that up. Yeah. So listen, it's been a great
Yeah.
conversation, you guys. I sincerely appreciate you guys all for being part of it. This is the Fanatic panel. The entire purpose here is to have a conversation. Some people are too petulant to be able to do that. That was a passive aggressive dig. Yeah, I did that. But then sometimes you can actually have
Chatter,
conversations.
Mr. Girl, which one? Or Lawrence?
Actually, with somebody here. But anyway, my point being, this is
Yes,
a great
ma'am.
conversation, and I appreciate you guys for being part of it and at least like trying to be civil. I do think that you know, these conversations are like, they are kind of hard, and finding people who very firmly believe in rape culture and like are that was a very difficult task, and I was asking around for it, and it was really, really, really difficult. But what I did find is that most people here in this conversation did more or less agree to some degree that like there is pushback against people who come forward with rape accusations. But I think we all can recognize with the advent of the Me Too movement and like the seeming like broader media representation for like sex crimes, there does seem to be a shifting in attitude that's happening, and some people feel like it's not happening fast enough, but at the end of the day, it is something that is occurring. Thank you guys all for being here. You can always follow me at twitch.tv/MrFanatic, where we'll be having a walk-on panel and kind of continuing this discussion on rape culture and so on and so forth. Everyone, we'll start with Anna. Please go ahead and shout yourself out.
Oh yeah, you can find me on twitch.tv/Anavoir.
Alrighty, thank you. Kai Clips.
Yeah, you can find me on cozy.tv/Kai Clips. I think Destiny's about to pass me in followers, so you guys better go follow quick right now. And then on YouTube, just Kai Clips.
Thank you. April.
Yeah, follow me Taftaj, TAFTAJ, on Twitter and Twitch, where I usually stream, or on YouTube if you want to see me talk to notoriously banned, dangerous members like Destiny or Haz or whoever. But yeah, follow me on Twitter if you want to see sexy pictures and occasional political discourse.
Destiny.
Yeah, I'm a staunch anti-rape advocate, Destiny. You can find me at youtube.com/Destiny.
Nasa Erudite.
Yeah, my name's Natsu Erudite. You can find me pretty much on most platforms except for Cozy TV by those names. Yeah.
All right, Stardust.
You know, I'm really disappointed that there were no pro-rape advocates on this panel. I feel like we've really missed out on hearing a perspective. I'm just kidding. I'm Stardust. You can find me on Twitch or on YouTube, Stardust Streams.
Thank you. I'm Fanatic. I'm working my best on trying to like improve the hosting and improving the discourse and making sure that like people are actually able to engage in conversation. I try my best to carefully vet every single person that comes into the channel. Sometimes people can still get past the mark. That's another passive aggressive dig, but ultimately I'm trying my best, and we're going to try our best to improve, including next week. You can listen to my albums under the name Fanatic on every platform. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you guys so much. And we'll see you guys over in Twitch. For those who want to be on the walk-on.
Oh, so I can't be on the walk-on panel, is what you're saying.
Destiny, I am so sorry, but unfortunately you cannot.
You and me are going to do a
Unclean,
duo stream,
unclean.
Destiny. We're going to be talking about weightlifting, and it'll be fantastic over on Cozy.
Destiny, you never included the Cosby clip in the rest of the video from our individual conversation in that studio. I need to go ahead and just send that to you, and then maybe you can, or maybe we can go over that.
Sorry, I don't do any of that shit. All right. That's
Okay. Yeah, well, I didn't actually upload it yet. That's why. But I'm gonna go ahead and upload that. I need to edit an intro, and I'm just terrible at editing. I'm taking my time, and I'm lazy. But yeah, that's that. Thank you guys sincerely. I'll invite most of you guys back for a future conversation if you guys were willing. And I'm out. Peace.
That's a good one. Thank you for inviting us.
Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Yep.
All right. Let's shit talk Fanatic. Oh, he's still here. Never mind.
Shit talk who? Fanatic?
Yeah, I'm just kidding.
So, which one of you is pro-rape here? I know you.
I thought you were going to take on that mantle. Come on, Stardust. No?
You seem like the kind of person that would start us.
True.
Well, you know, there are public and private stances, right? So, yeah.
When did you join
hiding your
Cozy
power
TV?
level.
Destiny.
Oh, I had the account made a few days ago because I might go there to farm debates with conservative people.
Yeah.
It's been
Maybe
good
I'll fucking
content
stream
so
over there.
far.
You know, I don't know. I'm trying to think right now. Who do I want to get more money? Because I built up the left so much with the Sound and Wash. Maybe I need to platform some good Nazis, get them some more representation, and get back to the good old days of fighting on the internet. It's a little uncomfortable that all the homophobia I see today on the internet comes from left-leaning people. So.
Yeah, like the what's his name, Alex, the politician guy.
Yeah, that's one
Gay
word.
Democrat.
A lot of other choice words that are being used right now for him.
I know, it's wild.
If you were, I don't know if this is like your first time. Oh, you're a fucking Canadian.
Yeah,
Sure.
and a
keep
baby
forgetting it 'cause
streamer.
You're like a normal human, but you're like Canadian. There was a Democratic candidate for the last election cycle. I don't know if you ever heard of Pete Buttigieg.
Yep, I did.
Yeah, but he
lot
had
of
a lot of the
people-
same stuff.
Here's
where
the thing
people-
about Canadian politics, all right? We pay way more attention to American politics than
yeah,
Canadian for the most
everybody
part.
does, don't worry, we're used to it.
I mean, the reality is that, like, to some extent, like, especially for Canada, like, the superpower below and the, like, politics that goes on does impact us inherently. And
Yeah.
it's more interesting.
Well, and it's also, yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah. Because of our party system, it's a little bit more boring.
Well, I think it's just because Americans are fucking sociopathic when it comes to everything. So our political debates are literally like esports, blood sports, or not, I shouldn't say esports, but online Twitch blood sports. So.
Yeah.
How do you guys feel like that discussion went?
Pretty good. Got really deep on the
today,
issues.
Steve?
Sure.
So it was a little bit awkward at times. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
What'd you guys think?
Very awkward.
Yeah, I mean, not super productive, right?
I'm really excited to go to the
conversations
gym
I've never-
and sweat out my frustration. I'm really excited to do that.
Wow.
Yeah. How do you get big Steve?
Nice.
Nice.
Awesome.
Fuck, I was gonna say something. Never mind. You guys make the conversation.
Your chat probably wants one of us to say Obama, right?
No,
Obama.
not memes or whatever.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
was frustrated to see Anna. I felt that there was a lot of mischaracterization of data regularly, and I
Yeah.
think like I didn't want to like call on it too hard because I think like it can pull away from conversations to just like fixate on studies and stuff like that, because like you can only generalize studies so far, and a lot of the things that we were talking about, like we said, there aren't studies for it, right? So it's like
Yeah,
it's
because we're
difficult.
getting into super niche things. This is like an online debater bro thing that I've noticed. Your mileage may vary with this, but usually when I'm having a conversation with somebody, anytime somebody just says the research or the data, I'm usually immediately highly suspect of anything they claim. Because if you're going to talk about like the research that usually you'll be referring to like one or two studies. Something that I think laymen don't realize all the time. I didn't realize this until I started actually dig through and read studies. Everybody thinks that if we talk about a particular issue, like a social issue, scientific issue, or whatever, people will always think that like, oh wow, like there must be like thousands of studies about this thing. But the reality is that for basically every single major issue, there's going to be like a few landmark studies. And when I say a few, I mean like two or three. Yeah. And then like responses to those studies.
Yeah, I don't think people realize that because like I've written lit reviews for a long time, right? And like we get into really niche topics by like graduate level programs, and it's like they want 30 citations for a lit review, and I'm like, motherfucker, I can't. Like there aren't 30 papers on this topic. That's like it seems niche, but it's actually pretty broad. Like intimate partner violence with like specific demographic factors that you're wanting to like kind of control for. There really isn't going to be that many studies on it, and forensic psych has some of the most robust studies on anything. Get into like a social psych topic and you're fucked half the time.
The other problem is like there's a huge replication crisis and like so many studies. Like if you really, cherry pick studies, you can come to like radically different conclusions depending on the issue.
Well, I think even beyond like replication crisis, the problem is there's just not really that much literature out there. Like I always laugh when recently the hot topic has been like trans athletes, but like people will be in debates and be like, there's been a ton of research on puberty blockers.
The science is settled.
And it's like, no, there's like one longitudinal study right now, I think, tracking people over, I think it's over 20 years. I think there's
And a lot of them are bad. Like they're weak methodologically because it takes a long time for like when it comes to trans athletes, like we have to kind of figure out a whole new way of controlling for different factors that we might just not think to control between men and women, right? And so it's like even the methodology itself is regularly improving. It's why there's no meta-analysis on this, because there's enough studies, but there's no effect sizes that are comparable at this point. You just have to go with what the leaning of the literature is.
Yeah, but yeah, it's frustrating. I wish people would realize that a little bit more, but
the other thing is like,
sorry, what?
well, it's just no way to like actually approach real life to be like, what's the study for everything? Like no one actually approaches life this way. And I think it's like pretty disingenuous to like demand that someone has studies for every single thing they say. Because we don't have studies for everything we say. And when we go into like a conversation like this, a lot of it needs to be based on like a good faith ability to engage with what people are saying and to take them at their word when they talk about observations that they've experienced, and then meet them where they're at to talk about your observations and, you know, dissect them in that kind of a realm.
Something that I don't like is it gets brought up a lot, and I'm going to be honest, I haven't read a lot of papers. I haven't read any papers on this yet, so I could just be wrong. But my mom used to say something to me a long time ago, which was anytime we were near the house, my mom would tell me, be really careful how you drive. Like 95% of car accidents happen within 5 miles from home. And I remember hearing this as a kid, and then at some point I got old enough and I was like, you know what, Mom, it's probably because 95% of people drive within 5 miles from home. Like, I don't think that's saying anything profound. I hear that stat brought up a lot, that the majority of like rape or sexual assault happens within relationships. I understand that is probably true, but I feel like that's probably because that's where the vast majority of sexual encounters happen. So it's a little bit annoying sometimes when I'll bring up the idea that I think that sometimes we give a lot of people freedoms, but we don't really give them the ability to explore them in a responsible way. And sexual liberation has been one of those things. And I'll say, like, we have to be careful that, like, we've empowered everybody to have casual sex, but, like, that's a pretty big deal. Like, casual sex is a thing that requires a bit of responsibility to do well. And oftentimes, and I think even you said this, not so erudite, you sophist fucker. I think even you brought this up where you're like, yeah, the majority of rapes happen within relationships. And I feel like that's a huge sidestep. I'm not accusing you of actually sidestepping it, but I feel like it's a sidestep sometimes to that claim where people are trying to say, like, oh, well, even if we got rid of all casual sex, like, there'd be just as much rape or more because most of it happens in relationships anyway. And I'm like, I think there's a special set of concerns for like one-off, like one-night stands versus like relationship sex that happens. That's what I was saying.
Oh, for sure.
There's less,
absolutely.
There's less like communication that you've practiced with these people when you're having more casual encounters and things like that. So there's more room for misinterpretation.
And I feel like the ways to protect yourself are actually a little bit more self-evident too, like when it's casual relationships. I know that probably seems like maybe reductive, but it's like there are certain things that just like in general you can take with any stranger encounter that you can apply to a sexual encounter, like somewhat keep yourself, like don't give them your personal address, don't take them to your personal home, probably drive separately if you want to like stay safe, certain things like that. Whereas like when you're in an intimate partner situation, at least in my experience, like between like clients that I've had like kind of more of a stranger or like acquaintance sexual assault versus individuals who've been in relationships, it's a lot harder to like tease apart. At least like therapeutically, it's been like a lot harder to process with clients because it's like so much more complicated. And the ways that you like, because a large part of like for trauma people is to like actually understand what prescriptions will keep them safe from that terrifying thing happening again. And an intimate partner relationship, it's tricky other than like try to get a better partner, but like what does that actually mean and how do you practically and realistically do that?
Yeah, and the set of concerns are just going to be fundamentally different, right?
I mean, I think the other thing is that like we've changed a lot legally in regards to this. Like Britain used to have laws where, you know, it was legal to engage in like marital rape. And I think you have to like look at history and sort of put things into perspective when we talk about rape culture. Like the way that we've approached marital rape and just like rape in general has changed so much. And it's why like sometimes I get like a little bit uncomfortable when you start, you know, throwing out accusations about existing in a rape culture, just because it can really sort of, you know, obscure all of that change that's occurred.
Do you think it would maybe be more accurate to say like there's a problem potentially with like dating culture specifically? Because like definitely I think the thing of like gatekeeping and pursuit leads to a lot of really, really bad situations.
Yeah, exactly.
I think so. I think just the way that we can't erase the way that we've socialized people, but we continue to push people into a dating culture that might not work for them based on the way that they've been socialized. So there's going to be tons of misinterpretation there because of that.
I think a lot of the problems too are like these more minor things that aren't necessarily like penetration or, you know, the worst case scenario that people think of when they think about rape. But you hear these stories coming out where, you know, really people just had like bad dates or uncomfortable dates, or, you know, were unhappy with how something went, just in the basic interactions. And those things are bad and like need to be called out. And
we don't have a vocabulary for it because
exactly, it's rape. All rape.
And like sexual assault used to be like rape, right? But now sexual assault just like broadly categorized as like anything. But like some people would call catcalling sexual assault, and so it's like there's like this like weird like problematic like what's it called? When like words dilute basically over time, concept creep that's happening with these terms that just makes it like don't rape, so like just never flirt with a girl, never like what does that mean actually?
I've started to say misconduct more. I think that kind of is like more encompassing. I don't know what you guys think of that word.
I mean, I think that's an empty word. I don't think it means anything, right? Misconduct.
I mean, it could mean a lot of things, I guess. It could vary a lot in intensity. It doesn't necessarily mean that, full on rape, right? It could be
I don't like to have like a rape scale. I think there needs to be like a whole new landscape for having these conversations. That doesn't involve like rape at all, right? I think that's what needs to happen, but we just don't have it right now.
I mean, this happens with so much. Like, I think people have had like gaslighting is like another one of these words where it's just
No, you're wrong. You're actually gaslighting right now in this conversation.
Yeah, you're just crazy, Destiny. It's actually a huge problem that people use this word incorrectly. But yeah, this happens like all the time, and it's really frustrating. It makes just having conversations about things so difficult.
Yeah. I mean, concept creep is a really big issue. Bad words is a really big issue. And then even just like, I think like conflation, like, because I think when we like start doing lots of concept creep, we start actually doing like, we begin to genuinely think that something like a catcall is potentially a similar behavior to like a grope. And it's like, those are obviously not the same things. And you get into this weird territory where now you're like, now I have to start questioning, like when you're saying I was really distressed by it, what do I do? Do I question you on how distressed and like your personal experience with it? Like it really kills the conversation because it's like, well, I don't want to like just dismiss your distress, but also like, is it the same as like other behaviors? And it's just like, even just optics wise, it's so difficult to navigate to not just like come away just like being like, wow, you're a giant piece of shit. And you just like want to question all victims. And it's like, that's not what we want to do here.
Something that's really disappointing is that like, just by virtue of having a few of these conversations on stream, I've gotten a couple emails, and I think somebody even posted a thing on my subreddit where they basically had like a big self-reflection moment. They were like, actually, I think I've been involved in like some pretty shitty or rapey behavior in the past, but they've never been willing to engage with the idea because they didn't want to think of themselves as a rapist. And when those are like the only words available to do it, it's the only way that people will view it. And then also, I think something you kind of mentioned or kind of allude to here is the idea that like, if you can have that like boundary of like rape is bad, but that's like the only thing that we're saying is bad, well then as long as I like don't actually rape anybody, you should be fine. So you're like almost encouraged to like play right up against the boundary of like, well, what is like actual rape, and as long as you don't do that, you're like good to go.
Yeah, and then to accompany for that, people just cheaply extending the line of what is rape to be like, well, no, that's bad too. That's rape too. And you're like, no, there are other bad behaviors that don't need the same label and are still problematic. We just can't talk about them because of your choice of words.
Yeah.
The inverse of this, like I've been in situations, to speak candidly, like where I tell someone, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be involved in this sexual encounter. And like by technical definition, like I have been raped, but also like in those specific scenarios, like I wasn't traumatized by that. And I came away from the scenario like that sucked, but I don't necessarily like feel comfortable calling it rape personally because it like brings in all of these like negative emotions that are sort of not apt. So I think that like you have to be really careful not to traumatize yourself or, label everything you experience as rape. Because a lot of times like you can experience scenarios and also like come away from them not necessarily, totally traumatized.
Yeah, I think I talked about this with Eurode before. I don't know if she said this was a real term or not, but I called this is what I called like the retroactive trauma or whatever, where you have like a shit. I I see, this is my really simplistic analysis, but I see it happen with children, where if a very, very young child hurts themselves, usually they'll like look around for a reaction, and if they see a negative one, it will be a traumatic event for them. But if they don't see a negative one, they might fuss a little bit, but then they get up and they go. And I wonder sometimes if people, I think it's hard to balance this out because we can all acknowledge that there are people that go through like pretty nasty stuff that don't realize it until later. Some friend will tell you some experiences in a relationship and you're like, that was really bad. And they're like, oh, okay, maybe. But then it feels like other times people will get together and like psych themselves the fuck out over like what was like a shitty experience, but like nothing worth being traumatized over,
I actually see it like in practice a lot. Like it's a really big frustration, and it's like a bone that I pick with coworkers of like, particularly like with kids, because I think they are a lot more susceptible. But like I think especially with therapists, there's that authority piece that they like generally just want to take your word with like a lot of weight behind it. Where like it's why I'm like huge on like I never label somebody's experience as trauma. I only let them label it because I think it's like really, really damaging. Of like, what if they wouldn't have been traumatized if I didn't label it trauma? Because we do see evidence of that happening. And it's really scary because you want to call it trauma to be empathetic. Like the desire to label it as such things is actually like, you're trying to be empathetic. Maybe sometimes virtue signaling, but I think mostly it's an intention of empathy, but it has like completely the inverse effect on that person's psychological health. And then it's like, who actually traumatized this individual? Like kind of you a little bit, like not fully, obviously you didn't do the action against them, but like,
and it's frustrating because like we're willing to acknowledge so much. Like this is the biggest thing that I took over like a 1-year psych course. The biggest takeaway that I had, the most helpful thing for my life, was I am an incredibly unreliable observer of my own reality. I am so faulty in so many different ways. I cannot be trusted to like accurately account for things. And there's like 55 million different psych experiments where people lie to themselves. There's it's like the ICE line test or whatever. What the fuck am I thinking of? There's the line test on the board where like people.
Oh yeah. Where it's like different lines. You can do it with like standing up. You could just like be in a waiting room and have all of your people like stand up, and then they'll just be like, yes, I have to stand
a certain way in an elevator. There's like so many ways that people are bad at accounting for time, bad at accounting for, and we acknowledge it. We know these are true, and then we combine that with like once people have started to learn things, we know that people's minds can be molded by this, and we will make fun of these people in some exceptions. For instance, the hypochondriac that goes into a doctor's office that's read like 52 different medical problems about where their cough comes from. People will like kind of make fun of it, like, okay, you're not dying, you don't have cancer, like you read this and now you think you've got it, now nothing can get you off of it. And people will kind of look at it and be like, okay, we know for a variety of reasons why this is probably not a good thing. But when it comes to mental health, it's like we forget all of that, and now like every single thing is the most ultimately validated thing in the world, and everything has to be validated, and to recognize any of these biases makes you a victim blamer or makes you doubt somebody's experiences or invalidate somebody's experiences. It's like, well, hold on, like we can't just pretend that because it's a mental issue people have become fundamentally altered agents that don't have all the same follies that they did before, but we're kind of forced to,
And it's wild to me because like literally lots of therapy is all about convincing you to reframe your landscape, to reframe how you engage with the world around you, right? And so it's just like, this is literally a therapeutic technique. So this doesn't mean that we like just, the way to solve trauma is we just convince everyone they weren't traumatized. Obviously, like that's not the solution. But yeah, when it comes to like, especially like, because mental health is happening in the brain, and it's the brain that's having these like weird things, like the brain is so hyper flexible and can just like shift the social landscape. Yeah, it's a weird phenomenon of like, yeah, but if it's mental health, it's objectively true and we can't question it. I'm like, what? Like, how?
I mean, a good example of this, I think, is like trigger warnings. Like there's studies done into trigger warnings, and it turns out that like what you're doing is like you're priming people to be traumatized by these things.
And it doesn't help. There was one big one. I think there was an article in the Atlantic that was talking about it as well. But like, I don't think there's any research that shows that trigger warnings are beneficial for college students.
Yeah, no.
I don't think there's anything out there that says that.
No, they're only useful for parents to make parental like viewing decisions. That would be my only argument for them. But in college, if you're going to a class on like World War II, why are you giving a trigger warning? Like if it's on World War II, what do you think it's going to be about? Like daisies? Obviously not.
Well, the advantage with like parents is that like a parent can make a decision for the child and like choose to limit their content. But like when you present someone with a trigger warning, it's like a lot of times it doesn't encourage them to avoid the content. It just allows them to engage with the content in a way where they're like prepared to be traumatized and end up traumatizing themselves.
Yeah, because there was one, I think that one study that I'm thinking of, I think what it did was I want to say the way that the methodology worked was it showed the exact same content to two different cohorts, but it told one cohort that it was like triggering, and it didn't say it to the other one. And the ones that were told preemptively that it was triggering were more likely to report being traumatized or having some symptoms. I think it was even like I think they asked questions of like, did you feel more stressed out? Did you have a bad day the next day or whatever? The people that were told it was triggering had that negative response.
That was my impression as well.
Just by virtue of being told. Erudite.
Because it's priming.
Yeah, it is true. Which is a really well understood. Well, maybe not super well understood why it happens, but it happens, right? We can measure it. Somebody wants to have a conversation with you about things that you might have said improperly. Do you want me to restart this call? I can do it with all of you. With this other person who can't rejoin this call now.
I gotta think about that. I was gonna go to the gym tonight.
Yeah, it can be a short combo. I have to go to the gym too, so we're all needing to gym tonight. Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, what time zone are you in?
MST. It's 8:30 here.
Oh my God, you've got so much time. Are you serious?
What is your bedtime? What is your sleep
8:30?
schedule like?
It's 8:30. I'm sorry. What are you doing tomorrow? Streaming? Playing video games?
I have a job, by the way, that I have to work.
What time do you have to clock in?
I don't have to clock in at any time, but I do need to get.
Oh my goodness!
I need to get.
Wow.
I'm working about like 60 to 70 hours a week right now. I just need to get up early enough to do this
Okay,
shit.
so what you're saying is we have to limit this conversation to 20 minutes. I understand.
Yeah, 20 minutes. My bedtime is. I have a little baby child. No, I'm just kidding. I go to bed at like 1 or 2. But I do have a fair bit of work to get tonight, so I need to go to the gym, which takes me about 2 hours, and then, yeah.
Okay, so you're saying you don't want to do this conversation?
I don't. Sure, we can do this conversation. Fuck it.
You're so easy to bully. Thank you. All
I know. I'm
call it.
Canadian. I don't know what to tell you.
Hold on.
Oh my gosh.
Why is your name so fucking stupid? Tafjuza. What the fuck is your
Taftaj?
name? Taftaj.
See, Erudite gets it instantly.
Taftaj.
Yeah, but
Taftaj?
I've been simping over Taftaj for a very long time. Destiny has just started
likewise.
his journey of simping for Taftaj. Okay.
I don't simp.
I just messaged Destiny. Oh God, not so Erudite is so based. Every time I say something.
Oh, I just mostly message people and I talk about how attractive Taftaj is and based.
boy.
Obviously,
He's
I don't
so
just
nice.
objectify you. But.
See you guys there.
We're going for 10 million views on YouTube.
Unbelievable.
We're at 8 million. What? Shut up.
Drama.
Oh my God.
Are we turning on cameras or is that weird?
Let me just get
Whatever
it.
you're comfortable with.
Okay.
So who's the moderator in this situation?
Who's the? Oh, I'm moderating, of course.
Rating? Okay. Did she?
She's coming. Don't worry. We don't need cameras. We're all women in here, including me, who has a woman's name, so we're good.
Very true.
The viewers want cameras. So.
Oh.
Give the people what they want, Destiny. Obviously. What do you mean? Why am I telling the 13-year veteran how to
Gotta get the
appease
views somehow.
appease his viewers?
Okay, we're waiting.
You know what? While we wait, I'm gonna run to the washroom. So.
Washroom? Go do that. Yeah. All right. How you guys doing? What are your predictions for this? These fireworks that are about to erupt here.
I think it's gonna go really well.
Yeah, I've heard that she's saying super nice things. So
Okay.
I think August will be very happy. That's what I think.
Gotcha. Taftaj. Taftaj?
Yeah, you're doing great. You could also just say April.
No, I don't think I will.
Okay.
I don't think I know you that well to call you at first name basis. Okay.
So I should call you
Pal.
Destiny every time.
I would appreciate that, actually.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah. Mr. Destiny.
No, that's too much.
Sir Destiny.
We're waiting for not so Eurydice to come back, okay?
I think Not So Erudite's name is harder than Taftaj.
Maybe.
It is English, which is an advantage. It is actual words.
I mean, technically everything is actual words, right?
Okay, find Taftaj in a dictionary, Stephen. That's what I mean.
Okay, fuck you. Is Eurydice in a... Oh, shit, it is. Fuck, never mind.
Destroyed.
Shut up. Okay.
Yikes! All right.
Welcome.
Also, it's erudite. You pronounce it very strangely.
Erudite? That's because it's a really fucking
Erudite.
strange word.
Erudite.
Okay.
Erudite.
Steven's borderline illiterate. Okay.
What is that
I would-
supposed to be? Is that like a reference I'm not getting?
It probably comes from a Jordan Peterson book, so.
He's just mad because he has to only get his news from the Atlantic because it gives those audio recordings to overcome his reading
Well,
difficulties.
I mean, I think New
Can't all be
Yorker.
fine literature enjoyers of 12 Rules for Life. How to sort our life from chaos as I fly to fucking Russia. Fuck! The
I
brain
don't know.
benzo addiction. Shut up. Okay, Anna and not so Eurydice, go.
I think Anna, you're probably feeling some way more than I am. So do you want to let me know
Yeah, I'm
what's going
feeling
on?
a whole fucking lot. I'm fucking pissed.
I guess can I?
I mean, you
ask
basically dogpiled me.
just me myself, or are you talking? Are you pissed with all of us right now?
Mostly with Fanatic, because he just basically set me up to be fucking dogpiled. Just after last night when he was being a fucking asshole to me, trying to convince me I wasn't emotionally abused by this douche over here.
Okay, so I guess Fanatic isn't here to talk.
Why are
or
you
defend
fucking
himself.
laughing?
I'm sorry. It's my dog. Hold on.
So I tried very hard to make it clear that I wasn't completely disagreeing with what you're saying, and I think Taftage and the other people here as well were trying to say that we're not disagreeing with 100% with what you're saying. We're
The
just
facts for the matter. Yeah.
we're just adding on a second layer.
Yeah, it's fine. I didn't have a problem with what you were saying. Or you, Taftage, it's fine. Like, I'm not upset with you guys.
Okay.
But I think
Wait, but you're
I think
upset
we
with
were
not so
all-
Eurydice, right?
Yeah.
Or you're erudite.
I think we were all saying similar things, though. I mean, there wasn't that much that was different.
I mean, you can't just say that, like, anybody can induce false memories in anyone. That's not true. You can't just make someone believe that they were raped when they weren't. That's not
My understanding is that the first research relating, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is the first research relating to false memories came from forensic psychologists that were noticing that witnesses could create false memories in each other. It wasn't therapists, it was witnesses doing it. That's my understanding.
It came from BC Okanagan, actually. I know this like personally because I'm friends with people who like worked under the main researcher under that. So like that's typically where it originates from. I guess I don't know quite, Anna, what your like frustration was around that.
I mean, it just seemed like everything I brought up you were just dismissing as like somehow like the research was it like some flawed in some way, and so like you can't use it, and like
So I guess are you comfortable with the idea of like me disagreeing with you? Like in academia, I'm sure you're familiar, we argue about stuff and it gets even pretty heated where we'll argue about theories. I mean, the like language debate between Chomsky and the other dude was like super, super spicy. So like academics are going to disagree with each other all the time, but that's like the process of good science. It's like we should be disagreeing. We should be pushing each other on methodology. We should be questioning things. We should be open about the limits of certain things because it just improves the science overall. But that doesn't mean that like I have some personal feelings about you in that moment when I'm questioning some of the data that you're presenting.
the other people who already hate me and attack me constantly, well, I mean, they're just gonna use that as more ammo against me.
Right, but I guess like what do you suggest that I would do in that situation? Because like I'm invited on a panel to talk about ideas. I'm going to engage with the ideas and I'm going to question data, with your data, with anyone else's data as well that I might get. Not that I question all data, but I'm going to look at it and be like, well, where are the limits to these things and what can we take away from it? So are you basically like saying that like in a debate panel, I have to like not
No.
disagree with you? Like what's your recommendation for me to do?
No, of course not. No, of course not. It's just, I don't know. I don't get why, like, the empirical data that I was bringing up, like, somehow wasn't, like, I don't know. It just seemed like you were saying, like, it wasn't good. I don't know. Like, I don't know what I'm talking about or something.
Sure.
Like,
Do you want to
I'm pretty
maybe...
sure I do.
Could you clarify for me what you felt that I was saying, and then would you give me space to correct if that was or wasn't what I was saying?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. What did you feel like I was saying?
It seemed like you were basically saying that, like, all the empirical data that I was, like, bringing up was somehow like flawed and like unreliable and just like whatever could be dismissed or something.
Okay. Was there a feeling like personally that was attached to that? Like, did you feel like I was also trying to undercut you as an individual?
Maybe a little, I suppose.
Okay. Do you, now that like we're less heated, do you think that I was actually doing that? Because if you do feel like I was actually doing that, we can talk about it. But I just want to know, do you still feel that way, that I was actually trying to personally attack you?
No.
Okay. I'm glad. So I was definitely questioning the data, not overall. I'm not saying that like everything you presented was useless and garbage. I'm saying like, here are some of the limits that I see to some of the interpretations, which is why I wouldn't use this data to make the extent of the claims that you potentially were making with them. That was all I was saying. I wasn't trying to say, I think Anna's stupid and dumb and nobody should listen to her, because to be honest, I'm mean enough that I will say that to somebody if I think that.
Yeah.
Okay. So are we good?
Well, I don't know. Did it feel like Eurydice was like discrediting rape victims with the way that she was engaging with her research claims?
Maybe. Yeah, that's what I felt like also. Yeah. Kind of.
Okay. Could you explain that more to me?
It seemed like, yeah, it sort of seemed like you were kind of saying that, like, yeah, like, we can't trust. It just sounded like you were really dismissing, like, any of the, like, anything that's, like, self-reported or whatever. Like, I know there's flaws with self-report and retrospective, of course, but it just kind of came off as though, like, yeah, it can't be trusted at all. And the only way to get like an objective, or like the only way to be able to trust it is if it's like dealt with in like a criminal justice context, or like has been reported to police or something. And yeah, I don't know.
Okay. So I guess I'm concerned about being I don't want the perception to be that I'm dismissing rape victims, because I take it really seriously. I think it really, really matters. And I agree that there's been a systemic problem and systematic problem historically as well of a dismissal of rape victims, right? When I'm questioning the extent of the data, this isn't to say that I don't believe rape victims. My issue is that I'm curious, would you agree that basically the word rape has come to mean a lot more things than just actual rape? Like it's kind of been extended beyond.
And I have a problem with that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we'd agree on that. And so my concern with some of these studies is I went through the CDC's questionnaire itself, and some of the questions left me concerned of being like, I can see how this might lead to people marking as a yes, like an affirmative, because the questions are worded in such a way that they're a little bit leading, and they don't preclude certain situations that I don't think anyone, even themselves, would necessarily identify as rape, but it wouldn't be marked off on the measure as rape. And so my concern about overinflating rape numbers is because I do think there are individuals who are bad actors who try to use rape claims for their benefit, and the reason that makes me so mad isn't just because of the individual's lives that they fuck up, which sucks, but it particularly makes rape victims' lives so much harder, right? When we have Alice Sebold, like a really big writer, coming out about basically being like, yeah, I did make a fake allegation and I had a guy incarcerated for like multiple years. There's a really big problem with that because it actually makes rape victims who have been struggling to be heard historically for a long time, it makes their job bigger, right?
I mean, I disagree because I don't think that, I think that's a bit much to claim that there's a significant amount of people, though, that are, like, bad actors. I don't think it's enough to, like, be able to sway data, though. I mean...
But people don't make decisions based on data, right? They'll make it off of, like, one or two high-profile cases sometimes.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah, I guess I've always felt like that's just kind of like a scapegoat to be like, well, look, someone made a false accusation, therefore I'm just going to be like an asshole and like not believe rape victims. I feel like that's way more of a problem.
I feel like the problem isn't the false accusation. This is something I just recently figured out. I don't think the problem is ever the one-off. I think the problem is how other people respond to the one-off. Because I think the issue comes from the fact that there is a one-off thing that happens and it's bad, but rather than everybody saying it's bad, you get like some group of people that almost seem like they're defending it, and then it makes the people on the other side think that it's a bigger problem than it might actually be. I think that's the scary thing.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, look, I've seen a lot of like, but also, well, there also is a problem of like actual victims like being accused of like tons of them get accused of like being false
Yeah, that is a problem.
accusers.
But there's also like false
big
accusation
problem.
problems too. There's problems all over the place. That's the issue.
I don't think false accusations are that big of a problem though.
Well, you might not, but maybe you're not the type of person to get falsely accused, or maybe it's just something you're concerned with. But there are people
that's an ironic statement.
Well, I think
there-
a specific
there
problem
are
is-
going to be people in different areas that do feel like a little bit worried about that, and if they see how the culture around that is changing, and we've seen it happen in esports and in Twitch, where sometimes like really dog shit accusations are made, and it takes the guy like months to respond to it because it's so serious, even if the original accusation was as thin as air.
I mean, Anna, I think a lot of the problem is like very specific to the medium too. Like when you have social media and trial by society, by the public, you know, that invites a lot of people to sort of speculate and treat it like this just like reality TV show. And so like on one hand, social media has allowed people to make these accusations, but it's also introduced new problems by making it so public. And so, you know, one thing we can talk about is just like the role of courts. And if people are more able, whether it be through like education or whatever, to make rape accusations credibly through the courts, you know, that might be a solution to people feeling like they need to go to the public to do these things, and therefore, you know, introduce and invite all of these extra problems.
Yeah. I mean, I agree that cancel culture is a problem, of course.
Well, but it's not even cancel culture. You would expect people to respond really negatively if somebody has a rape accusation against them, right? I wouldn't think that's cancel culture. That's just people being kind of reasonable.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, part of
like
the very
social
normal.
shaming. Yeah, that's why we social shame like murderers even when they get out, right? Because there's this attachment to their name, and there's an element of like we probably should socially shame these behaviors because if somebody's a rapist, that's a really bad thing, and we're going to view them as immoral, right? And so if somebody's because of the huge weight of consequence of being claimed, it's the same with the malingering. Like you know, clinically, if a client gets diagnosed as a malingerer, they're fucked.
Oh,
They're literally
yeah.
fucked. They'll never get on welfare. They'll never get support. It's like they're fucked. I would say the same with being accused as a rapist, especially if it becomes publicized, right? And especially in the cases like we don't want innocents ever going to jail. We also, in this case, don't want innocents having a trial by media and being accused of being a rapist and having all of the social repercussions of literally being a rapist and then it turning out to not be true, but the damage is already done. That's the problem with social media is the damage is already done half the time. And that's really, really scary.
I can understand that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Anything else?
I guess that's it. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.
for
It
talking.
seemed like you were really frustrated with me specifically. Was I misreading that?
Yeah. No, you weren't.
Okay.
That's accurate. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that or would you prefer to talk about that privately?
We could talk about that privately. That's fine. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for talking with me though about this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries.
Wow, well, good job. I'm proud of all of you.
Also, Erudite is too good at de-escalating.
I've worked in a lot of jails. De-escalation was my bread and butter.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you said you had to leave. Why are you being awkward? Leave. Go away.
All right, I'm gonna go work out. And if you want to chat more privately, you can just DM me. You know where I'm at.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Good night, guys.
Good night,
Bye.
guys.
Good night.